office for 5 months and 5 days. Why have you not been able to end the Ukraine war?
Because it's more difficult than people would have any idea. Vladimir Putin has been more difficult. Frankly, I had some problems with Zelensky. You may have read about him. And it's been more difficult than other wars. I mean, look, we just ended a war in 12 days that was simmering for 30 years, frankly. We ended Rwanda and the Congo. It's coming to sign the documents. We've already signed basic documents, but they're coming, I think, to the White House on Friday. We ended, Serbia was going to go at it. But maybe the most important of all, India and Pakistan. And that wasn't whether or not they may someday have nukes like we're talking about in the Middle East, like we're talking about with Israel and Iran. This is they have nuclear weapons. I ended that with a series of phone calls on trade. I said, look, if you're going to go fighting each other, it was getting very bad. You know how bad that last attack was. It was really bad. If you're going to go fighting each other, we're not doing any trade deal. No, 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 you have to do a trade deal. They said, we're not doing any trade deal. And in fact, I had the general, who was very impressive. The general from Pakistan was in my office last week. You know, Prime Minister Modi is a great friend of mine. He's a great gentleman. He's a great man. And I got them to reason. I said, we're not doing a trade deal if you're going to fight. And if you're going to fight each other, we're not doing a trade deal. And you know what? He said, no, I want to do the trade deal. We stopped the nuclear war. Go ahead. Go ahead, Jeff. Here's another beauty, Jeff. He's a beauty, all right. Go ahead.
Mr. President, to follow up on Ukraine, will the United States contribute any more money to Ukraine's defense this year to the $5 billion that allies are giving? And one question, you had another meeting with the Dutch opposition leader, Mr. Wilders. Can you tell us about that meeting? And are you upset about his anti-Muslim stance?
I'm not upset about it. It's just his view. He's unhappy with the way things are going in this country and various countries. He was an opposition leader. And I was asked to meet with the opposition leader by the people that are running. I think they have some deal where if you have a meeting, you're supposed to meet with an opposition leader. I said, that's strange. We don't do that. But I met with I didn't know him. He seemed like a very nice guy, but he's in opposition to the current people, and that was set up by the current people. So I assume when I met with the Prime Minister, you're supposed to meet with the opposition. We'll have to try that sometime in our country. Let's not do it. But I thought he was very good. As far as money going, we'll see what happens. There's a lot of spirit. Look, Vladimir Putin really has to end that war. People are dying at levels that people haven't seen before for a long time. Go ahead. Go ahead. White shirt. Oh, she's all excited.
Okay. So, BBC News Ukrainian. I would
Where are
like
you
to
from?
ask you, I'm from Ukraine.
Oh.
So my question to you is whether or not the U.S. is ready to sell anti-air missile systems Patriot to Ukraine. We know that Russia has been pounding Ukraine really heavily right now.
Are you living yourself now in Ukraine?
My husband is there.
Wow.
And
I can see you're very, it's amazing.
And me with the kids, I'm in Warsaw actually, because he wanted me to be
Is your
there.
husband a soldier? No?
He is.
He's there now?
Yeah.
Wow. That's rough stuff, right? That's tough. And you're living here?
In Warsaw.
And you're a reporter?
I am.
Good. So let me just tell you, they do want to have the missiles, okay, as they call them, the Patriots. And we're going to see if we can make some available. They're very hard to get. We need them too. We were supplying them to Israel, and they're very effective, 100% effective. Hard to believe how effective. And they do want that more than any other thing, as you probably know. That's a very good question, and I wish you a lot of luck. I mean, I can see it's very upsetting to you. So say hello to your husband, okay? Thank you. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. You were criticizing...
Where are you from?
Bloomberg News.
Oh, Bloomberg. That's wonderful.
You were criticizing the Federal Reserve Chair before coming to this summit.
Yeah, I think he's terrible.
I was wondering if you've begun interviewing different candidates for the Fed pick.
Yeah, I know within 3 or 4 people who are going to pick. I mean, he goes out pretty soon, fortunately, because I think he's terrible. We have no inflation. We have a tremendous economy. Hundreds of billions of dollars of tariff money is pouring in. Factories are being built because they don't want to pay the tariffs, so they're building them all over the country. I think we're close to $15 trillion. I told you 5.1 trillion from the Middle East alone, but of investment money coming in. There's never been anything like that in the history of our country. But we have no inflation. And we have borrowing because Biden, stupidly, they did short-term debt. So we have borrowing coming up. And, you know, we'll go 10 years, maybe longer, maybe shorter, but we'll go a long period of time when we do the debt. And because of him, because of this guy, we will have to pay for years. We'll be paying for him. And I said to him, listen, there's no inflation. He says, but maybe there'll be some. That's true. I said, if there is some, what you do is raise the rate. I'm okay with that. You raise the rate in 2 years from now or in a year from now. But because the rate's high, we have to pay more for debt. It's pretty equal. In other words, if it's 4%, it's 4%. If you drop it a point, you'll pay 3%. So it's fairly equal, not necessarily, but fairly equal. So we're going to end up paying maybe 2 points or 3 points more. 3 points would be about $900 billion a year because of this very average mentally person. He's an average mentally person. I'd say low in terms of what he does, low IQ for what he does, okay? Right. So instead of paying $900 billion, we don't want to pay 900 just because he doesn't want to lower the rate. I said, if there's inflation in 2 years or 3 years or 1 year from now, you raise the rate, you take care of the inflation, among other things. But he's probably a very political guy, I guess. I don't know. I think he's a very stupid person, actually. All right, one more. Let's go. How about you? Go ahead. She looks so happy and everything.
Thank you.
That's why I
I'm
picked
from
her.
Spain too. I'm Ana Buch from La Vanguardia. I wanted to know if
You're where from?
Spain too.
Ah.
I wanted to know if you want to
That's the Spain corner right there. Shouldn't have said that. That's okay. I do like Spain, by the way. I think it's unfair that they're not paying, but go ahead.
Are you going to negotiate directly with Spain about...
I'm going to negotiate directly with Spain. I'm going to do it myself. They're going to pay. They'll pay more money this way. You should tell them to go back and pay. You're a reporter? Tell them to go back. They ought to join all of those countries that are paying 5%. Spain's going to be just about the only one that's not. They were the most hostile toward doing it. It just doesn't make sense to me. Okay. All right, Kelly, go ahead. Here we go. Here's another one.
Hello, sir. Thank you very
We
much.
got them all today.
Okay. So, Mr. President, you talked about expecting some on-the-ground assessments at Fordo and other sites.
No, here-
Is that
here again.
Israeli and U.S.?
It's been obliterated, Kelly. It's
Okay.
been
What is your
obliterated.
message then, sir, to the intelligence community when they present reports? You're not disputing the DIA report. You're just,
They presented a
exists.
report that wasn't finished. We're talking about something that took place 3 days ago.
I understand that, sir.
The
It's an
report was
initial
done
assessment. So
3
what
days
is
ago.
your...
Wait a minute.
Yes.
They didn't see it. All they can do is take a guess. Now, if you take a look at the pictures, if you take a look how it's all blackened, you know the fire and brimstone is all underground because it's granite and it's all underground. You don't show it. But even there, with all of that being said, the whole area for 75 yards around the hole where it hit is black with fire. The group that's run by this gentleman, in fact, you may want to talk about it for a second because we're going to issue a report. And I think it's not even a very exciting report at this point. It's been obliterated, totally obliterated. And they did a report, but it was like, if you look at the dates, it's just a few days after it
Understood,
happened.
sir.
So they didn't see it. They said it may be very severe. Go ahead.
Understood. Do you have a message for the intelligence community, though, in terms of unvarnished information getting to you, that it's not
I don't
just-
really have a message. I would say issue the report when you know what happened. I wouldn't say that it could be severe or maybe not. They use the word severe. It could be severe or maybe it's not.
And briefly,
So people like you picked up and said, oh, it's not severe.
We're just
No,
looking for the
the
text.
report was not a complete report. Yeah, the message was probably wait till you know the answer before you.
and
Go
sir,
ahead.
did you not have a public component to your Zelensky meeting for a tactical reason with President Putin?
Let him answer this.
Hello, Mr. Secretary.
Yeah. there's a reason the president calls out fake news for what it is. These pilots, these refuelers, these fighters, these air defenders, the skill and the courage it took to go into enemy territory flying 36 hours on behalf of the American people and the world to take out a nuclear program is beyond what anyone in this audience can fathom. And then the instinct of CNN, the instinct of the New York Times is to try to find a way to spin it for their own political reasons, to try to hurt President Trump or our country. They don't care what the troops think. They don't care what the world thinks. They want to spin it to try to make him look bad based on a leak. Of course, we've all seen plenty of leakers. And what do leakers do? They have agendas. And what do? Do they share the whole information or just the part that they want to introduce? And when they introduce that preliminary report that's deemed to be a low assessment, you know what a low assessment means? Low confidence in the data in that report. And why is there low confidence? Because all of the evidence of what was just bombed by 12 30,000-pound bombs is buried under a mountain, devastated and obliterated. So if you want to make an assessment of what happened at Fordo, you better get a big shovel and go really deep, because Iran's nuclear program is obliterated. And somebody somewhere is trying to leak something to say, oh, with low confidence, we think maybe it's moderate. Those that dropped the bombs precisely in the right place know exactly what happened when that exploded. And you know who else knows? Iran. That's why they came to the table right away, because their nuclear capabilities have been set back beyond what they thought were possible because of the courage of a commander-in-chief who led our troops, despite what the fake news wants to say.
But you're not disputing the report said what it said, even though it was initial.
The report said what it said, and it was fine. It was severe, they think, but they had no idea. They shouldn't have issued a report until they did, but we've gotten the information. I think Pete said it better than you can say it. And you know, you should be proud, you, especially you, should be proud of those pilots, and you shouldn't be trying to demean them.
No, there's
those pilots flew at great risk, a big chance that they'd never come back home and see their husbands or their wives. Let me just tell you, you and NBC, fake news, which is one of the worst, and CNN, New York Times, are all bad. They're sick. There's something wrong with them. But you know what? You should be praising those people instead of trying to find some. By getting me, by trying to go and get me, you're hurting those people. They were devastated. You know, I got a call from Missouri, great state, and I won 3 times by a lot. And I got a call that the pilots and the people on the plane were devastated because they were trying to minimize the attack. And they all said it was hit. But we don't think it was really maybe hit that badly. And they were devastated. They put their lives on the line, and then they have, and I'm not referring to you, but real scum come out and write reports that are as negative as they could possibly be. It should be the opposite. You should make them heroes and heroines. You should make them really people that they were so devastated when they heard this news. And you know what they said? One of them, I spoke to one of them, said, "Sir, we hit the site. It was perfect. It was dead on." Because they don't understand fake news, because they have a normal life, except they have to fly very big, very fast planes. But it's a shame. You should be making them heroes. All right, in the back. Go ahead, back, white, yeah. White jacket, yeah. Go ahead, give my mic. Hello.
Deborah Haynes from Sky News.
Good.
Mark Rutte, the NATO chief, who is your friend, he called you daddy earlier. Do you regard your NATO allies as kind of children?
No, he likes me. I think he likes me. If he doesn't, I'll let you know. I'll come back and I'll hit him hard, okay? No.
He
did it very affectionate. Daddy, you're my daddy.
Do you regard your NATO allies, though, as kind of like children, and they're obviously listening to you and they're spending more, and you're obviously appreciative of that, but do you hope that actually they're going to be able to defend themselves, defend Europe on their own without...
I think they need help a little bit at the beginning, and I think they'll be able to, and I think they're going to remember this day, and this was a big day for NATO. You know, this was a very big day. They took it. One of the gentlemen said, you know what, we've been trying to raise money raise the rate for 30 years, he said, 20 years, from almost the beginning. And he's been there for a long time. He said, until you came along, it never happened. What you did is amazing. It's been sort of an amazing day for a lot of reasons, but also for that. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think they can do it without you, though, in the future? Can they do it without the
ask
United
Mark.
States?
I mean, you have to ask Mark, okay? So we're heading back. We're heading back. I want to thank these two gentlemen behind me. They're incredible people, both of them. They've done a fantastic job. And Susie's in the front, and she's done great. And Monica, thank you very much. It was quite an exciting time. And we're going to be heading back. We'll be back soon, and we'll see you in Washington, D.C. Remember this, we have the hottest country anywhere in the world. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
All right, that was President Donald Trump holding a news conference in The Hague at the NATO conference, and along with the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense. Let's get the latest headlines coming out of that press conference, the latest takeaway from the NATO conference in The Hague with Skylar Woodhouse. She is a reporter for Bloomberg News. She joins us from Washington, D.C. Skylar, lots of headlines crossing the tape here. What's your takeaway here from the day trip of President Trump in The Hague?
Yeah, lots coming out of the press conference just there. I think one of the most notable moments is sort of how the president has responded to the attacks in Iran. He was on the defense side, clearly upset with the way the reports have been coming out on how the attacks didn't hit, underground nuclear areas. So he was clearly on the defense there. And I think it's also just been really interesting to sort of see how, he's navigating his relationships with other global leaders and with Spain. And there was a lot going on coming out of that press conference, including even criticizing Fed Chair Jerome Powell.
Oh, yeah, there was a lot coming out there. But let's go to Spain. He mentioned that they're not going to pay the full defense budget of 5% of GDP, that they're going to double the tariffs, and that's how they're going to recoup some of the money. Is there any indication on your reporting or Bloomberg's reporting that that could be true?
Well, I think one thing that we've seen from President Trump throughout his presidency so far is he really wants to shift how much the U.S. pays to other countries. So this really just falls in line with what we have seen from him since taking office. And this is a part of his, trying to lean into the U.S. paying less and having other countries sort of pay more.
Skylar, the president also said that the U.S. will meet with Iran, that he will be speaking with Putin. Do we have any details around that, or is that just rhetoric at this point?
Yeah, I think we'll have to sort of wait and see how this all comes together in terms of the meetings. The president did say that the U.S. will have discussions with Iran. So I think we'll just have to wait and see when those discussions actually happen. It says next week, but we'll have to see what day and what that actually looks like, or even how involved the president is in those discussions. And even with his with speaking with Putin, he has spoken with Putin, a couple of times here, but I think he's really trying to wrap the war up in Ukraine. So I think it'll be interesting to see how he handles his meeting with Putin.
All right, Skylar, we appreciate it. Thanks for jumping on with us. Skylar Woodhouse of Bloomberg News on Trump speaking at The Hague at that NATO summit. At the same time, Jay Powell is testifying to the Senate, saying things like it's very hard to predict how tariffs will show up in inflation and don't have a view on whether the dollar is overvalued, says the bond market's fine and functioning well. Let's get you caught up right now with the Bloomberg Business Flash, and for that, we go to Lisa Mateo.
You got it. We have the NASDAQ 100 set to extend its record-setting rally. We'll start with the NASDAQ right now, up 0.4%, 93 points. The S&P 500 up 0.1% or 10 points. The Dow, well, that's little change, down about 33 points. We have the 2-year yield at 3.81%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.32%, and that's up 2 basis points. Brent crude up 0.9% at $67 a barrel. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index. That is little change. And Bitcoin right now just above 107,000. Shares of FedEx, they're down about 2.5%. The company company warned its profit would be worse than expected this quarter, also declined to offer guidance for the rest of the year. Then you have shares of BlackBerry. They're up 15%, raise its annual sales guidance following better than expected quarterly results. And finally, cereal maker General Mills. Their shares are down about 3% after its outlook, well, it missed expectations. Consumers just pulling back on their grocery expenses. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Alex.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, streaming live on YouTube as well. Coming up, we're going to get back to corporate earnings at FedEx, reporting some numbers, some disappointing numbers. We're going to check in with Lee Klaskow, Bloomberg Intelligence analyst, covering all that for Bloomberg Intelligence. We're going to have more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
listening to Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Alex Steele here alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in business, economics, and finance through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence folks. They cover 2,000 companies and 130 industries all around the world. They also cover all the economic stuff. And for that, we go to Ira Jersey, Bloomberg Intelligence Chief U.S. Interest Rate Strategist. At the same time that we were listening to President Trump, Jay Powell is speaking to the Senate. There's a lot happening in terms of the dollar, the supplementary leverage ratio, a lot of market-moving things. What's the big takeaway so far?
Yeah,
Yeah, he's not saying anything that he hasn't said in the past. You know, the Congress and today's senators keep on hounding him about whether or not the big beautiful bill is a good thing or a bad thing for deficits and how it'll affect markets and the like. I think that you just brought up the supplementary leverage ratio. We'll get the proposal this afternoon, and people will be able to comment on that after we see it. You know, this is something that I think a lot of people have been talking about, the shift in the SLR, exempting treasuries as an example, as a way to increase liquidity. Personally, you know, my view is that it won't help markets as much as I think some people hope, in large part because there's other regulations that are the binding constraint for banks and dealers, and why they're not intermediating markets as effectively as they were before the Basel III rules were put into effect.
So there's no reason to think that this Fed is not going to wait a while. What is a while, do you think? I mean, it goes into that September meeting? Can it afford to wait till later in the year even, do you think?
Yeah, I think September will be the earliest that the Federal Reserve might make another move. And our call, though, is 50 basis points in December. So basically, the idea that the Fed will wait as long as they can before cutting, and then once they cut, they'll continue to cut. And
kind of what they did the last time, like a year ago.
Yeah, similar, right. But maybe a couple of 50 basis point cuts first, right? Basically get rates down 150 basis points in over the course of 6 months or so is our current call. I think the Bloomberg economics team, Anna Wong and her team think it's a little bit slower than that. But you know, this Fed, I think in particular, doesn't want to be responsible for another uptick in inflation. So until we have a very clear idea about what tariffs are going to do, and inflation expectations haven't really changed very much, but you know, is there a need for them to cut rates? When you look at the unemployment rate where it is, historically still pretty low, not a lot of reason to think that the Fed needs to be in a hurry to cut.
So to that point, you were listening to Powell, so you didn't hear Trump, and he was asked about the Fed chair, and he was saying that what he said to Powell is, there's no inflation now, cut now. If inflation rises later, then hike rates later.
Yeah, the Fed doesn't operate that way, right? They know that the economic cycle takes a long period of time to gyrate. And the Fed...
You're right there. He's having a coughing moment. You okay? You need some water?
I do need some water, I think.
Okay, let's try and get you.
We don't have any.
That's all right.
Okay, but I think Ira's Jersey point is that there's going to be economic cycle works differently. It's not as fast. The rate cuts take a while to actually come through. I'm just guessing that you're going to say this, that the rate hikes and cuts take a while to come through, so there's a lag, so it's not as easy as just lift rates up or down and up based on the numbers.
That's right. The long and variable lags of monetary policy are the thing that matters. So Alex nailed it on the head. I think I'm okay now. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I've been speaking quite a lot the last couple of days, as one can imagine. Not as much as Jay Powell, obviously, right. but quite a lot. And you know, the Fed, even though we're going to have a new chair, and there's a lot of talk about will that new chair be very dovish, it is a committee, right? So Jay Powell doesn't do any of this in a vacuum. There are members of the Fed who are relatively hawkish. You look at the dot plot that we got last week, and when I was on earlier, Paul asked about, you know, the Federal Reserve meeting last week, and one of the things that we did receive was this dot plot that showed that basically a large minority of the Fed, right, so a third of Fed members think that they shouldn't cut at all this year, according to the dot plot. So we have to take all of those members into account, regardless of who President Trump ultimately appoints, and you know, those people think that the economy is going to remain pretty good for the rest of the year.
What are the auctions telling us these days?
Yeah, the Treasury auctions have gone okay. Yesterday's 2-year auction wasn't great. We have a 5-year auction today with all of this other stuff going on.
Yeah, we do. And 7 tomorrow. You got water right there, by the way.
7 tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I think it's like over 100 billion over the next 2 days, right?
Yeah, so a lot of debt being issued. Now keep in mind, what's interesting is that we're actually not raising a lot of money with this debt because there's a lot of debt maturing. So if you think about all the 5-year notes that were that are coming due on the same day, we're actually raising only a very little bit from these coupon auctions. And meanwhile, we still have the debt limit to talk about. That's something that's like not on anyone's radar, but a super important thing that is affecting the way that the Treasury Department is issuing debt right now. because even though we have this 5-year auction and it'll probably go fine, it'll go okay. Sevens tomorrow might be a little bit more interesting because we do have it is a little bit more risk, a little bit more duration. It's a sector that there's a lot of futures contracts that are based on the 7-year. But T-bill issuance is going down, and actually this week the government is actually paying down debt using cash to repay those T-bills because the debt ceiling is still in effect, and that the government's going to default in late August, probably, according to our model, if the debt ceiling's not raised. Now they'll raise it, but again, it is affecting the way that the funding markets are working right now.
All right, great stuff, Ira. Always good to see you. Ira Jersey, Bloomberg Intelligence Chief U.S. Interest Rate Strategist, joining us there. As a reminder, if you want to watch Jay Powell with testifying at the Senate, you can go ahead to TV. TV is broadcasting to you live. We're going to take the company angle and talk about FedEx in just a moment. And for our listeners in the U.S., here's a reminder. You can listen to us via satellite radio, Sirius XM, channel 121, access the world's only global audio business network coast to coast 24 hours a day. Bloomberg Radio on Sirius XM channel 121 is presented by Oracle. Stay tuned for the latest market news and industry research. The next hour of Bloomberg Intelligence starts right now with the equity market a little bit mixed. S&P up 1/10.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been in U.S. corporate high yield.
Are the companies lean enough? Have they trimmed all the fat?
One person's chaos is another person's animal spirits.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Do investors like the M&A that we've seen?
Are people just too exuberant out there?
The window between the peak and cut changing super fast.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Alex Steele here alongside Paul Sweeney. Welcome to Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We have a great hour lined up for you. If you want to listen to Jay Powell, you can head over to TV. That testimony with the Senate is being broadcast. But here we're going to focus on a lot of the company action. Lee Klaskow, Bloomberg Intelligence, will help us break down FedEx. Also, Diana Rosera-Pena, Bloomberg Intelligence consumer staples analyst, will dig into General Mills. Those North American sales not great. David Kudla, founder, CEO, and chief investment strategist at Mainstay Capital, will also join us. And Michael Halen, Bloomberg Intelligence senior restaurant and food service analyst, on the winners and losers in the restaurant industry as the valuations really start to widen out. But let's get you caught up right now with the Bloomberg Business Flash. And for that, we go to Amy Morris down in D.C.
Thank you, Alex. This Bloomberg Business Flash is brought to you by IBKR. Will U.S. oil production exceed 13.4 million barrels per day for April 2025 at IBKR Forecast Trader? The yes was recently at 39%. Start predicting today at ibkr.com/forecast. Last trading date for this contract is June 29th. Wall Street traders drove gains in stocks, pushing the S&P 500 closer to its all-time high. We do check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 is up 0.1%. NASDAQ up not quite 0.5%, and the Dow is down 0.1%. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.32%. The 2-year yield at 3.81%. Checking NYMEX crude oil now, it is up more than 1% higher, and Brent crude also 1.4% higher. Fed Chair Jay Powell on Capitol Hill, a second day of congressional testimony, and he's sticking to that message that the central bank remains in wait-and-see mode.
Despite elevated uncertainty, the economy is in a solid position. The unemployment rate remains low, and the labor market is at or near maximum employment. Inflation has come down a great deal, but has been running somewhat above our 2% longer-run objective.
Fed Chair Jay Powell testifying before the Senate Banking Committee. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Alex.
All right, Amy Morris, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We are also streaming live on YouTube, so head over to youtube.com, search Bloomberg Live Podcast. That's where you'll find us. And if you got a smart TV, just search Bloomberg Pursuits, and we will pop up there for you. Let's take a look at some of the stocks on the move today. I'm Paul Sweeney along with Alex Steele, and we're joined by Bloomberg's Norma Linda. Norma, what are you looking at?
A couple names that I'm keeping an eye on this morning. I'm looking at shares of Bumble, that's ticker BMBL. We're seeing shares surging for double-digit gains, up as much as 27%. Now, this is the highest level since February, and this is after it reported adjusted EBITDA forecast. They boosted that there, and also that was for the guidance for the second quarter. But one thing that I really am looking at here for the company is that it announced 30% job cuts as it additionally raises that quarterly outlook that we were just talking about. And so it'll actually be slashing about 1/3 of its staff. And we're really seeing a lot of these dating apps really just trying to figure out how to market to some of the younger users and what the dating environment is like right now. So we are seeing the company down about 25% year to date. But of course, the street is really celebrating the fact that they're trying to make some strategic developments here.
This is literally apropos of nothing, but I feel like I know a lot of younger people now in their 20s who are like dating and marrying before 30. Which is totally different than my generation. So like they don't even make it to a dating app because they've already found the person in college or something.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, this is, whatever. Anyway, moving on, FedEx. Different story.
FedEx, definitely a different story here. Let's take our FDX. This has really been a name that's been in focus throughout the day. A lot of people consider this to be a bellwether of the economy. We're seeing shares of the company down as much as 5.8%. That's the most since April 10th. But of course, this is after the company said that it warned that its profit would be worse than expected this year. And it also opted out of offering guidance for the rest of the year, essentially saying that they don't really know what it'll look like. But I mean, I think a lot of people were expecting this, especially as we see a lot of these companies citing tariffs as being a concern given the uncertainty there. But they also did talk about, of course, the trade war and U.S.-China shipments deteriorating sharply just last month. So lots of action happening right now in the space, but we're seeing shares down about 20% year to date.
BlackBerry, I didn't even know was still a thing.
See, I didn't even know that this still existed. That's why I had to bring it up.
Yes,
I was like, we have to talk
Remember when the
about
ticker was
this one.
RIM? Anyway, Research in Motion? No, you're too young for that. Remember that?
Yes.
See, I missed that one. I missed that one. But ticker today is BB here. We're seeing shares jumping as much as 30%. Seeing its best day of the year right now. Really seeing a jump here. But of course, this is after it boosted its revenue forecast for the full year. We're seeing some analysts that are positive about the company's forecast, and they even hiked some of their price targets on the stock. But I'm looking at RBC saying that the outlook still seems to be a bit conservative, but it assumes an uncertain auto macro environment. But up about 30% this year. But if you look over the past 12 months, this stock is up 122%.
All right, very good. Norma Linda, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Norma Linda covering the equities for Bloomberg News. And for more conversations like this, subscribe to our new Stock Movers Reports. Listen for the 5-minute audio reports on the biggest winners and losers in the stock market. Subscribe to Stock Movers on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you listen. Let's get the latest news coming out of the Middle East. President Trump at the NATO summit in The Hague said he believes the bombings of the nuclear facilities effectively meant the conflict was over. Ethan Bronner, Israel Bureau Chief, Bloomberg News. He's based in Tel Aviv. Ethan, is it the belief on the ground in Israel that the war is, as President Trump said, over?
They don't want to contradict the president too much too publicly. Look, I think the first issue that has arisen in the last couple of days is how much damage was done to Fordo and to the other sites, right? And we had this surprising Defense Intelligence Agency low confidence report suggesting that not that much damage was done to it. The president disagreed with that. The Israelis disagree with that. So the Israelis put out a statement today saying it was set back by many years. It was very badly damaged. And the Iranians have also said it was badly damaged. That's the central question. So the Israelis are saying if that's the case, we're fine with where we are right now.
Is there any indication that Israel will send its own experts in to check? I mean, I doubt that would be possible. But what's the procedure for something like that?
I don't think that they have they're not going to be able to go in officially. The president did say at the NATO summit that Israeli agents had gone in and checked on it. Now, I don't know whether that's true. If it's true, I'm sure they're not very happy that he revealed it, but it could well be true. The penetration of Israel has had inside the Iranian nuclear industry is remarkable. So it's possible that they've already done it.
So, Ethan, are there ongoing military operations by either Israel or Iran right now against each other?
No, there are not. I mean, there is a ceasefire, absolutely. Each has stopped hitting each other. And it looks like, for the Israelis say they got 75 or 80% of the missile launchers that Iran has, and a large percentage of their missiles, some percentage of it, maybe half. So that's a big deal. And then there's of course, the whole nuclear question. What the Israelis are basically saying is, if we have to go back in one day, we will. Now, will that be okay with President Trump? We shall find out. But, you know, there was talk about whether there's going to be something written down about this ceasefire. Both the Israelis and the Americans are kind of saying, no, really necessary for us, thank you very much. So we'll see what happens next on that.
What is the relationship currently between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Look, I think it's pretty good. Obviously, it's like any marriage. I mean, you know, they get along quite well. They fight at times, but I don't think, I think it would be a mistake to imagine that just because Trump yelled yesterday, that everything has gone to hell, that they don't have a good relationship. They've worked very, very well together in these weeks and months, and I think they will again. I really do. I don't think the relationship is bad.
So what are next steps for Israel?
I think right now Israel has 15,000 people that are homeless because these missiles really did a hell of a lot of damage, and they spent about 40 billion shekels on this war, and they've got to start, you know, they've started to reopen, restaurants are reopening, schools are back in, the airport is open. So there's that element of what's next for Israel. What's next for Israel about Iran is I think they will continue to watch it very, very closely, continue to monitor and continue to coordinate with the United States. And if they see a rebuilding that matters to them, then I think they'll take action. But I don't see that happening in the coming weeks or months.
Before we let you go, let's just shift the location to Gaza. And what's the latest there?
I can't see much progress at the moment. I mean, again, we have here kind of two views. One is that, well, if Iran has been badly damaged and Iran is the sponsor of Hamas, then Hamas is going to be more flexible in handing over the remaining hostages. But I don't know that that's true. I think that Hamas is also standing firm about what it wants, which is to get rid of Israel out of Gaza. So at the moment, I'm unaware of there being any actual progress of any kind.
All right, Ethan, thank you so much. We really appreciate it, as always. Ethan Bronner, he's Israel Bureau Chief, Bloomberg News. He is in Tel Aviv, boots on the ground. We love getting his reporting. We appreciate some time for him. FedEx reported some numbers. Let's get back to the corporate earnings. Disappointing. They're saying tariffs are having an impact on their core shipping business. Let's get the latest on that. Lee Klaskow, Bloomberg Intelligence, Senior Transport, Logistics, and Shipping Analyst, and host of Bloomberg Intelligence Taking Transport's podcast. If you like railroads, trains, trucks.
Wait, he has a
big ships,
podcast?
he has a podcast.
He's joining the cool kids now.
He is. And if you're into all that logistics, transportation stuff, this Talking Transports podcast is the place for you, so go check it out. Lee, FedEx, what did they tell on the street today?
So their last quarter was a decent quarter, but the quarter looking forward, their first fiscal quarter, is not going to be a great quarter, and that's really just given the uncertainty that is being driven by the tariffs. So, you know, they're seeing weakness in their B2B business, they're seeing weakness in their industrial kind of end markets, and they're obviously seeing some weakness for volumes that are coming out of China into the United States. So, you know, these are kind of the headwinds that they're facing. You know, FedEx is doing what it can. It has a couple of initiatives where it's trying to take permanent costs out of its network, because at the end of the day, the company is transitioning from one that used to be B2B, business to business, is now is mostly, you know, the growth really is B2C, so that e-commerce business, which is more expensive to deliver. So what they're trying to do is create a more efficient network. And unfortunately for them, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long time. And this is a kind of a journey that they've been going through for the last couple of years.
Here's what was confusing to me is that UPS did the same thing, like in the last quarter. Like they were like, it's uncertain, we don't know what's going to happen. FedEx did the same thing, but the stock got really punished in after hours. And I appreciate it's just down 2% now, but why wasn't this already baked into the stock?
That's a good question. I was thinking about getting uncertain tattooed on my forehead because I say it so much. But
Don't do that. That's going to hurt.
Or probably spell it wrong too. And what the reality is the stop and go and stop of the tariffs are making it very difficult for not only businesses to operate but consumers. You saw the other day consumer confidence came in below expectations. So the tariffs are really having an impact on volumes. Once we get more, I think really what businesses really need to know is kind of what are the rules of the road, and then they can operate within those rules. But the stop and go aspects of the tariffs can be really confusing and disruptive to supply chains, which is obviously, FedEx and UPS, they're core to move that freight around the world.
When you look at FedEx businesses, what's their exposure to China? How are they exposed to China?
Well, they're exposed on their express businesses, so they fly things from all over around Asia, and obviously China is the largest aspect of that to the United States. It could be anything from commercial goods to consumer goods. So they do have a decent exposure. One of the other things that FedEx does is they're in the less than truckload business, which also came in a little below expectations, and that's been a tough business that's really kind of geared towards that industrial economy. So when you see the ISM being in contraction territory for 29 of the last 31 months, that's really weighing on that business. And FedEx does plan on spinning out that business sometime next year.
So what's the right question then to be asking for a FedEx and a UPS at this point? Because as you point out rightly, the uncertainty trade for transports is definitely front and center. Like no one's going to have a firm outlook. So what's the next question?
I guess the next question is, how are you restructuring your networks to be able to handle the more expensive home deliveries that we're all accustomed to? So, we're all accustomed to free shipping, when you order something online. How are they going to facilitate that at the lowest cost they possibly can? Because they face competition, the FedEx and UPSs of the world. They face competition from local players, from gig economies, from the U.S. Postal Service. And so they really need to, bend that cost curve lower to be able to drive better margins. And, UPS and FedEx have been, again, trying to restructure their networks. And I guess the real question is, when is it going to end, and when can we see margins start improving? But I don't think that's going to be a 2025 calendar year story. I think that might be more of a 2026 story. And, as things normalize and volume begins to grow again, I think that should really generate pretty good margins in these types of businesses.
And Lee, let's pivot just here at the end here. You also cover the big ocean shipping companies. What are they seeing in terms of freight and cargo and all that kind of stuff? Again, in a world where we're operating with some uncertain tariff levels.
Yeah, well, they're enjoying the disruptions that are created, the geopolitical disruptions, because those are pushing rates higher than they probably need to be. So that's for them a net positive. The net negative, to your point, is on the volume side. We are seeing a surge of freight that's going to be heading to Southern California in the weeks to come. And so that is an incremental positive. But the problem is these surges in freight demand could create air pockets and much tougher to second half comparisons when it comes to volume. So you could have strong volumes near term, but kind of weaker volumes with the months further out.
All right, Lee, always a pleasure. Thank you so much, Lee Klaskow. He joins us from Bloomberg Intelligence. He covers all the transports there. He's senior transport logistics and shipping analyst. He's joining that podcast train. There's a Bloomberg Intelligence Talking Transports podcast. I thought we were the only BI podcast.
No,
Look at that.
There are a lot of them out there, those analysts.
Branching
So check
out.
it out. Yeah.
All right.
They're the experts. So.
Coming up, Diana Rosera Pena, Bloomberg Intelligence consumer staples analyst, will be joining us, and Dermot Mills, earnings plus. David Kudla, founder and CEO and chief investment strategist at Mainstay Capital Management, will be joining us to get his take on what to do in the markets. What do you do with an S&P like 40 points away from another record? What do you make of that?
Crazy round trip. And again, if you went to sleep New Year's Eve and woke up today, you're like, nothing happened.
And even in the last 10 days, 12 days, nothing would have happened. Anyway, more coming up. This is Bloomberg Intelligence.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Amy Morris. This Bloomberg Business Flash is brought to you by Oracle. Attention growing businesses, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure for new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitment. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/Bloomberg. We do check markets for you all day long at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 pretty much flat, up 1 point. NASDAQ up 60 points. The Dow down 95 points. 10-year Treasury yield at 4.316%. The 2-year yield at 3.8%. WTI crude up about 1.5%. Brent crude up 1.4%. Purchases of new homes in the U.S. fell in May to a 7-month low. Rampant builder price cuts and sales incentives still fell short of alleviating affordability constraints. Sales of new single-family homes decreased 13.7%, below all estimates in a Bloomberg survey. Loop Capital predicts NVIDIA's value could reach $6 trillion, a 65% gain from its current $3.6 trillion market size. Analyst Ananda Barua raised NVIDIA's price target to $250, citing strong demand for its high-performance chips driven by AI adoption. NVIDIA shares right now more than 2.5% higher. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Alex.
All right, Amy Morris, thank you so much. We appreciate that. As always, Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, streaming live on YouTube as well. All right, up at the pantry on the 6th floor here, I start every morning around 6 a.m. with the bowl of Honey Nut Cheerios, and that is a General Mills product.
You can't go wrong with that.
They had some numbers that weren't very good. The company expects adjusted earnings per share to decline as much as 15% in constant currency basis this year. That's tough. Let's go to Deanna Rossetto Pena. She's a consumer staples analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence, joining us live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. So, Diana, General Mills, weak earnings outlook. Talk to us about what's going on in their business.
So it's pretty much what is happening across the packaged food industry. Volumes are not coming in, and they're going to have to invest more in pricing. So cutting prices as well as weak volume, it's basically flattish to negative organic growth. And that is obviously with a negative product mix is probably going to go down the P&L.
But why? Like, we still got to eat. So, and these are staples, right? So what's the problem?
Well, basically, there's a greater private label penetration. People are being more strategic with their spending, and they're not.
And so private label is like $3.65 from Whole Foods or something, right?
Yes, exactly. And in the past few years, retailers have invested a lot on private label brands, so the competition has become more fierce. And it seems that the brand equity that these companies used to have is not hidden anymore. Like, people are just not buying their products.
I'm one of them. I mean, before the pandemic and the inflation, I don't think I bought one private label thing ever. In fact, I felt strongly about brands, but now I'm like, screw it. And so we buy so many private label products now and I don't know.
And you're not the only one. We're seeing, like, across all age groups, particularly for Gen Zs, they're less dedicated to brands than the older generations.
What do you do about that?
Yeah, then you have to make your own private label?
Well, some of these companies do have some private label, but obviously they don't break it down, and they're trying to make it not as evident. Obviously they want to invest, they want to increase marketing. They're gonna probably cut prices, which is why you see adjusted operating income probably gonna decline 15% over the next fiscal year.
Can they invest in their own private label brand, or is that market so saturated?
No, it's not necessarily like in the marketing side. That will fall on the retailer side to invest in their private label. But I'm meaning more on like this cereal, the branded cereal.
All right, I'm asking for a friend who may or may not be getting his first pet ever in his lifetime on July 16th, a dog, Australian Labradoodle. Talk to us about the pet food business. What's that like?
So they have been, it seems that part of their business stabilizing a little bit. They are now, and you probably will see fresh pet declining, I believe 4 to 5% today, because they're extending the Blue Buffalo brand into fresh pet.
So Who's doing what?
General Mills is
Okay.
expanding Blue Buffalo into fresh food, fresh pet food.
Okay.
But fresh pet has like 90% of the market share. So obviously, you know, that intrusion is probably hitting them. We're not necessarily that convinced. They weren't very forthcoming in terms of like the type of distribution. Obviously, this is more refrigerated food that needs a little bit different than like the boxes of cereal that they're used to. So we're still you know, taking a look how they're going to distribute that and how they're going to kind of get share from Fresh Pet, which has like their own fridges and stuff.
What consumer staple brand is doing everything right?
I would say, wow, that is, from what I'm seeing, probably, I mean, like yogurt, like you're thinking about Chobani, like those guys seem to be.
So like a specialty health, sort of,
like,
but staple-y place.
Exactly. You have, you know, high protein, like all of the good attributes that people are looking for. I think those are like the ones that would probably benefit from this.
And I'll tell you what I still buy the brand, Campbell's soup. Maybe that's just a kid thing.
That's definitely a kid
Definitely
thing.
a kid
But I feel that way about like generics. We talked about this at drugstores. Like you got to get the real Band-Aids. Like if you don't get the real Band-Aids, they just fall off. It's just terrific. It's very upsetting. All right, Diana, thanks very much. Diana Rosera Pena, Bloomberg Intelligence Consumer Staples Analyst, joining us there. What do you do in the market? I mean, valuation is already high. We're a stone's throw away from a record high. David Kudla, founder, CEO, and Chief Investment Strategist at Mainstay Capital Management, joins us now. David, do you buy here around these record highs? Like, are we due for another pullback?
We're probably due for another pullback, Alex. I'll tell you, we're getting to that point where you kind of hold your nose and buy. And I say that because, you know, we've got a PE multiple on the S&P 500 over 22. It's richly valued, but we've been richly valued for a while. We certainly were earlier this year. And if we have the geopolitical tension, what happened in the Middle East seems to have calmed down we have a tenuous ceasefire, but it's calmed down for now. We're going to have the tax cut package that is going to go through by July 4th or soon after. It's battling its way through Congress. We've got record buybacks, corporate stock buybacks. And the economy is strong. We've got a Fed on hold, but I think that's, just the Fed needs to wait and see. Powell wants to wait and see how the tariff policy turns out. And that's probably the risk for the market is when we get towards that, July 8th, July 9th, they're not getting trade deals done, but do they get some done? Do they kick it down the road further so it doesn't become a big negative factor for the markets? But yeah, we're continuing to hold here certainly and continuing to buy. We think it's still a good time to be constructive on stocks.
What sectors or what factors are you guys focusing on these days if you are still buying?
Yeah, so, the thing that's really had an explosive move off the bottom in early April is the technology, AI type stocks that sold off so deeply. So that's been a good area for investors and that we've ramped back up as tactical asset allocators. We're constantly tactically reallocating portfolios. So we were a little bit of risk off on the way down and then risk back on the way up. What we've continued to maintain, though, is our exposure to gold. There are some factors there that we just believe there's a secular move in gold higher. So we have that in all of our tactical portfolios. The news we got today about NATO, with President Trump's meeting over there, that they have agreed to ramp up their spending to 5% of GDP. We knew we had some fiscal stimulus coming from military spending from Germany and the broader EU. That's going to ramp up even more. Now, they have to get there over the next decade, but as they do that, that strengthens what I've been talking about on the show is our overweight in Europe, which is trading at a discount to U.S. stocks. We can get better valuations there. Their Fed is cutting rates. I'm sorry, the ECB, their equivalent of the Fed, the ECB is cutting rates. And so they have good monetary policy, and they're going to have fiscal stimulus that's going to be on for years into the future here. So there's really we think, still bullish case for Europe. And then, as far as bonds, we just think it makes sense to keep duration very, very short. We just think the risk there, the duration risk there, with what's happening with deficits and the debt in our country, it still makes sense to keep duration very, very short.
Going to Europe for a moment, how do you play it? Is it betting on the euro? Is it sort of defense stocks, or is it just the bond index?
Well, good question, Alice. We had, both things working for us at the beginning of the year. We had Europe in rally mode, a lot of the market, a lot of bourse over there in rally mode, and we had the dollar weakening. So we had both of those factors that help our overseas investments. The strength of the underlying securities, or gains in the underlying securities, and the FX portion, the currency exchange rate. What we may be looking forward to as we go forward. Right now, the dollar is still, it's weakened considerably, about 9% this year, the dollar index. It's weakening against the euro. If we see signs of a strengthening dollar, we might hedge those positions, right? Hedge the currency out of the equation. But for Europe itself, there's just overall broad strength there in the euro stock 50, 600. You can play that in a lot of ways. Certainly, their defense stocks are doing well and are going to continue to do well with the military spending that they've signed up for.
David, you mentioned the dollar. The Bloomberg Dollar Index is off about 9% from its recent high start of the year. Even though stocks have bounced back and some other risk assets have bounced back, what do you make of the dollar's, underperformance?
Yeah, we've had a reaction function this year for the dollar relative to rates, relative to what's going on. The dollar weakening under circumstances where it typically hasn't in the past. When we try to look at history, we do that in the eyes of what makes sense, the normal reaction function. What's happened is, with all the QE that the Fed has introduced to artificially manipulate markets, some of those reaction functions aren't the same anymore. So it's getting very tricky on the dollar. There have been some shorts that have gotten hurt, some longs have gotten hurt because they're looking at traditional reaction function. We just need to monitor it very closely. For now, if the Fed does cut, we would expect that to weaken the dollar further. But we've had some odd reaction functions of the dollar based on what else is happening, factors that typically affect it.
All right, we got to leave it there. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much, David Kudla, founder, CEO, and chief investment strategist at Mainstay Capital Management. So the Fed kind of on hold, wait and see. So what does that do to that yield-sensitive sectors like commercial real estate? There you go.
I see where you're going.
Yeah, you see that? All right, Laura Rappaport, the founder and CEO of Northbridge, will be joining us on the state of commercial real estate. Where is there still good value here, and where do you just really need those rate cuts? This is Bloomberg Intelligence.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Amy Morris. This Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by IBKR. Will the U.S. Consumer Sentiment Index exceed 56 in July of 2025? At IBKR Forecast Trader, the yes was recently at 24%. Start predicting today at ibkr.com/forecast. Last trading day for this contract is July 31st. This just crossing the Bloomberg terminal. The Wall Street Journal is reporting Shell is holding early stage talks to acquire rival BP in what would be the largest oil deal in a generation. People familiar with the matter say talks between company representatives are active. Shell shares now down close to 1%. Purchases of new homes in the U.S. fell in May to a 7-month low. Rampant builder price cuts and sales incentives fell short of alleviating affordability constraints. Home builders now struggling to maintain their order books amid mounting economic challenges, including mortgage rates stuck near 7%, higher materials costs because of tariffs, and a slowing labor market. The rally that drove the S&P 500 to a striking distance of its all-time high starting to waver now. Bonds and the dollar posting small moves as Fed Chair Powell has his second day of testimony before Congress. We do check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. S&P 500 now flat. NASDAQ up 49 points. The Dow is down 94 points. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.32%. The 2-year yield at 3.8%. Bumble plans to reduce its global workforce by about 240 roles. That represents about 30% of the company. Bumble also boosted its adjusted EBITDA guidance for the second quarter, the guidance beating the average analyst estimate. Shares of Bumble now 19% higher. And Tesla new car sales in Europe fell for a 5th straight month in May. CNBC reporting data from the European Automobile Manufacturers Association show how customers are pivoting to cheaper Chinese electric vehicles. Tesla shares now 5.5% lower. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Alex.
All right, Amy Morris, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Alex Steele, alongside Paul Sweeney, live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We are streaming live on YouTube. That's the internet, Ken. You go over to YouTube and search Bloomberg Podcast Live. That's where you'll find us. Alex and I like to stay on top of this commercial real estate story. It's been one of the most fascinating stories going into and coming out of the pandemic, with what the change in how people work and live and all that kind of stuff, and how's that impacting different parts of the economy, including commercial real estate. Laura Rappaport joins us here. She's a founder and CEO of Northbridge. She joins us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. Laura, talk to us about Northbridge. You guys primarily are in the financing, the capital market side of the commercial real estate business. Is that right?
Exactly. So Northbridge is a Carlyle portfolio company focused on real estate private credit. And in particular, we are a leader in something called C-PACE financing, which is for all assets nationwide. And we work on everything from refinancings and rescue capital to renovations and new construction.
So in commercial real estate writ large, I mean, it's office, it's multifamily, it's retail, it's a lot of different things. How are things out there?
It's a very bifurcated market. Certain asset classes are performing exceptionally well. Well-leased multifamily, well-located multifamily. There's tremendous liquidity, tremendous demand. Same for retail and even Class A office. What's happening in other sectors, though, is if the fundamentals aren't strong, if the sponsorship isn't strong, those assets are very challenged. And it could be challenged because not that the asset itself is impaired, but the capital markets around it. There's $3 trillion of loans coming due in the next 3 years. And many of these loans who have these maturities were made in an interest rate environment of nearly zero.
Right.
And so now the asset might not be able to be refinanced, and the cost is in excess of the value. And so you have a situation for some of these assets might not be distressed because the real estate's not distressed, but the capital markets are. And so creative solutions like private capital are coming in to really fix the gap.
So would someone come to you to replace a bank mortgage they have on a piece of property because maybe are your...
Yes, we're coming in, again, from everything from a meaningful part of the stack for a renovation or a new construction for a ground-up multifamily to office, as well as coming in to be part of rescue capital. We're passive, in particular the C-PACE financing we do is passive. So we can come in and be able to pay down a lender, a bank, blend and extend, or pay for TIs and LCs, and really be part of a solution. We're the capital market solution, so it's kept us very active. We're also seeing banks pulling back. Valuations have come down. The lending standards have tightened. There are banks that are overweight, and they don't have the ability to lend. And so what's happening then? Again, back to fundamentals and private credit coming in to fill that gap, and we're very much part of that.
So if I'm like a multi-family developer, I want to go to a smart market, a growing market like in Nashville, Tennessee, do I go to my local Nashville bank? Do I come to somebody like you? Do I, can put you guys in competition, pair you off against each other? How do I do that?
Yes to all the above. I think it's, the thing I like about the market is it's very efficient. And so for well-located, strong fundamentals upon real estate and sponsorship, there's a tremendous amount of capital. What we're also seeing is that in areas where some of these, they need more leverage than previously before, the banks aren't able to get up to the 70, 80% leverage. That's where interesting capital stacks with a lot of structure are coming in to solve those solutions. And so that's where we're playing a meaningful role, bringing down the cost of capital and providing proceeds to to solve much needed problems in capital stacks.
One is also office to residential conversions.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. We always hear about that being this perfect solution, but it's actually quite difficult to make that happen. What are you seeing in that? How do you play in that?
So I have being a former developer, I have a very strong view on this. Not all real estate's created equal. And in fact, with real estate, the one thing you can't move is the location. But in particular, there's a lot of noise around this. In fact, for the last 25 years, the office market has been increasing. And this year, there is a 23 million square foot of office being removed, either repurposed or being extinguished, which seems like a lot. There's a lot of information around this. But if you put that in context of a national 97 billion square foot market, we're talking about a couple of basis points. So if you look at the office to residential conversion, that is a potential part of the solution, is not the only solution in certain key areas like New York City, where we have a national housing crisis, and certainly in New York, we also have a major housing crisis. But it's not going to be the only way to do it. Further, being able to take a building and convert it is very challenging. You have to think about the location, and if the building is able to be converted, does it have the right floor plate, light, and air? There's a lot of things that need to be taken into consideration. So it can be done, but it's also very complicated and has to be looked at on an asset-by-asset basis.
Several years ago, when it became clear that people weren't going to be rushing back to work, even though they were fully vaccinated and you could do so, Bloomberg News put out a great article that I still reference to this day, talking about 3rd Avenue, New York City. You're a New York City person, native. You know what's going on here. 3rd Avenue between Grand Central and, say, right here where Bloomberg is at 58th Street. They were calling out a lot of that stuff as really at risk. Big skyscrapers, maybe not A buildings, but it's 3rd Avenue in Midtown Manhattan. That's never going to be at risk. They were calling that out as being exactly the type of properties that are at risk. What are we seeing for those types of properties in major markets? Maybe they're not A-level properties. Do we have a sense of what their value is today?
Value is challenging. Cost is easier to peg. And part of the issue with value or the challenge is just the uncertainty in the market, which really comes to underlying rates and inflation. And when does that stop? And when do you have more of the calm so you can actually put a peg in the ground? What we're seeing with places like 3rd Avenue, there have been some assets that are going to be successfully converted. There are also offices that will be great renovation opportunities, and some developers have done a really nice job with really repurposing space. But to your point, that's part of the market. That's a very specific part of the submarket, of the Midtown East submarket in New York City. And so you really have to take it into consideration of not some of these buildings will be able to be renovated, but it also favors places like Bloomberg Building, which are beautiful and really are the example of new Class A construction where you have substantial collaboration, and that's favoring that's maintaining value.
All right, thanks so much, Laura. Really appreciate it. Laura Rappaport, the founder and CEO of Northridge. Really appreciate that insight. Just some breaking news. Wall Street Journal reporting that Shell is in early talks to acquire rival BP. Bloomberg has had reporting on this as well, that Shell was mulling it over. The Journal now reporting that Shell's in early talks to acquire rival BP. Many analysts say, look, Just the synergies alone at some point make it dumb to not do. All right, coming up, we're going to break down food service winners and losers with Bloomberg Intelligence.
listening to Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Alex Steele here alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We cover all the top news in business, economics, and finance through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence folks. They cover 2,000 companies and 130 industries all around the world. We talked earlier about General Mills and sort of the issues there with the private label brands and store brands. So let's take another look at consumer products, but look at it at the lens of restaurants and restaurant valuations, kind of the haves and have-nots. Michael Halen, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Restaurant and Food Service Analyst, joins us now fresh out of a recent report. So I asked Diana this, like, who's the winner in the consumer staples? And she was like, ooh, and it took her a while to get there because it's really rough. Same question to you. Who are the winners in the restaurant biz?
The two of the names that we really like this year are Cracker Barrel and Shake Shack.
Cracker Barrel, I still gotta go, man.
Yeah,
it's the goals.
They hired new CEOs last year. They're really focusing on improving the operations first, and then the marketing there. And so we're really excited about some of the changes and some of the early results. Both of them we expect to outperform pretty significantly on the top line this year.
Well, the Cracker Barrel, I mean, I know my way around a Cracker Barrel. I know where every little nudnik is in every store, because every store is the same, and then, of course, the same order, the Country Boy breakfast. But
what's in that again? Is that like
the Country Boy breakfast with the country ham?
Okay.
And you get the biscuits and gravy. It's a whole thing.
It's a whole thing.
It's a whole thing. Unbutton yourself and sit right down.
Yeah, gotcha.
What are they changing here? What is it? Because that's kind of what they are. Seems like their DNA is kind of that type of stuff.
Yeah, so one of the first things they did was focus their menu. Right, there was a lot of items on there that were not selling very good and also bogging down the kitchen. That has made the experience better for the employees. Employee turnover has plummeted. It was down, high teens year over year in the last quarter. So that saves them a lot of money on training and things of that nature. As the longer your employees stay, obviously the better experience your customers get, and then people come back. They're also touching up the stores. They're going to remodel the stores. Lighting and paint are some of the things that they're going to do across all the stores. Some of the stores need more work. They'll do the floors as well. That's something they're starting to do. And then they're ramping up the marketing. So now that the operations are running well, they're doing more social media marketing, TikTok. They just had their first NASCAR race. Yeah, the Cracker Barrel 400 down in Tennessee, right?
And Bristol.
And they're advertising on live sports as well as Bravo. There's huge overlap between casual dining fans and Bravo watchers, and so yes,
Did not see that coming. Yeah. So on the other hand, what are some of the companies that aren't doing so well?
Oh yeah, so some of the legacy casual dining brands, casual dining in general is having somewhat of a renaissance this year.
What's the examples of casual dining?
Chili's is the one. Chili's is rocking it.
Applebee's?
Absolutely, and Applebee's is not. So, so you got your preferences confused right now, backwards, I'd say. So yeah, Dine Brands, which owns Applebee's and IHOP, they're having a real hard time resonating with younger consumers and haven't been able to bring those consumers into the brand. They also have a large number of low-income consumers that visit those brands, and so that's really hurting their results. And then Bloomin' Brands, Outback Steakhouse is their biggest chain. They've same type of situation. They've struggled to bring in younger consumers into the brands, and their pricing got way ahead of itself. So if you compare them to Texas Roadhouse, it's a way more expensive experience, and yet maybe not a better product, not a better experience for the consumer, definitely not better service.
Your coverage is a great reflection of the consumer. What are your takeaways? How is the consumer out there? What are the restaurants telling you?
They're doing all right. They're doing all right. Last year was a restaurant recession. This year, results are better, and we expect them to get better in the second half. First quarter, there was some consternation, but it was a lot of bad weather. There was a bad flu season. There was some pullback by low and middle income consumers in March, but they seem to have rebound. Results have been pretty strong thus far, and the economic indicators that we watch are starting to get a little bit better. So,
are they valued appropriately for the conditions right now?
Well, me personally, I don't look at historical valuations because the market cycles change so much. I'm looking at it on a relative basis.
Okay.
Right.
Relative to what?
Relative to the peer group.
Okay.
Yeah, and so
I see.
So it depends on the name, right? It definitely depends on the name, but I think restaurants are set up for a nice, strong second half. We also are going to have that tailwind of tax cuts, and so I think just having that be the narrative versus tariffs and war and whatever else, I think is going to help shift consumer sentiment and spending.
Just the quick service restaurants, which otherwise known as fast food, how are they doing?
Fast food is struggling. Number one, they're lapping harder comparisons from last year. Number two, they have more exposure to low-income consumers, which continue to be hurt by the inflation that we've seen, right? Okay. And number three, they've overbuilt. So since the pandemic, full-service chains, casual dining chains, kind of pulled back on their development. They closed stores. Fast food has just been full steam ahead, opening stores. So supply and demand has gotten out of whack.
All right, Michael, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. Really good stuff. I still got to make it to Cracker Barrel. Michael Halen, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Restaurant and Food Service Analyst, joining us on the winners and losers of restaurant valuations. All right, for our listeners in the U.S., here's a reminder. You can listen to us via satellite radio on SiriusXM Channel 121. Access the world's only global audio business network, coast to coast, 24 hours a day. And stay with us. Your top stories and global business headlines are coming up right now in a market that's doing a whole lot of nothing. The The S&P is flat. NASDAQ up by 0.2%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average off by about 0.2%. And the bond market, a little bit of selling. Nothing really going on. This is Bloomberg.
This is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by Progressive Insurance.
I'm Steve Kathan. President Trump stands by his assertion that U.S. warplanes obliterated nuclear targets in Iran.
It's blown up to kingdom come.
An early U.S. intelligence readout indicated Iran's nuclear program was only set back by several months.
President Trump says UN inspectors heading to the nuclear facilities just struck by those U.S. airstrikes are backing up his insistence that the strikes did devastate Iran's nuclear capability.
Numerous of them are getting to see the site, and the site has been demolished.
Dismissing reports about that leaked intel report as fake news. Vicki Barker, CBS News, London.
Lawmakers in Iran began an effort today to suspend cooperation with UN inspectors. Trump said with an Iran ceasefire with Israel holding, U.S. officials will talk next week with the Iranians. Trump spoke after the NATO summit. CBS's Ed O'Keefe reports members agreed to spend more on the alliance.
Other member nations needed to up their spending to start matching the GDP levels of the United States. And so ultimately now the goal is to have everyone spend about 5% of their GDP in the next 10 years on a combination of troops and tanks and weaponry, but also the roads and bridges and seaports needed.
President Trump, who pushed for that spending increase, says Spain will pay on trade for resisting the spending hike. One more day of extreme heat in much of the East today. It hit a record for June of 101 yesterday in Boston.
It was terrible. It was terrible. It really was.
Jeanette and David were among the many who couldn't escape the triple-digit temperatures, which broke records on Tuesday.
That's what they said in, history or, however long they've been documenting things like that. It was a scorcher.
We're sweating, you know what I mean? Everybody's getting aggravated with each other. Fights are starting.
Out here, the heat can take its toll on the most vulnerable, like Ollie.
You know, our bodies deteriorate quicker than most people because we don't have the correct nutrition.
James Rojas for CBS News, Boston.
Former Vice President Mike Pence is commending the January 6th attacker who refused a pardon from President Trump, as we hear from CBS's Michael Wallace.
Pamela Hemphill posted on social media a letter from Pence. In it, he expresses his admiration for her decision to refuse the pardon and accept responsibility for her actions. Hemphill pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor for her role in the attack on the Capitol. She says everyone there was guilty, and Trump's pardons just contribute to the lies and propaganda.
The Trump administration has found California's Department of Education and State High School Sports Federation violated civil rights law by allowing transgender girls to compete on girls' sports teams. This is CBS News. A posthumous appearance for a British pop star.
these bands are put together is not normal. We weren't put together that way.
Liam Payne figures prominently in a new trailer for Netflix's upcoming singing competition series, Building the Band. It features the former One Direction member as a guest judge, alongside Nicole Scherzinger, Kelly Rowland, and host A.J. McClain from the Backstreet Boys. The show wrapped production before Payne died in October at the age of 31 when he fell from a balcony at a hotel in Buenos Aires. Officials found alcohol, cocaine, and an antidepressant in his system. Building the Band premieres July 9th. Deborah Rodriguez, CBS News.
Manuscripts, lyric drafts, recordings, and scrapbooks from Stephen Sondheim have been donated to the Library of Congress, showcasing the creativity of one of musical theater's giants. The collection includes about 5,000 items. Steve Kathan, CBS News.
Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Matthew.
President Trump says talks with Iran resume next week. Welcome to the Wednesday edition of Balance of Power. As the president tells NATO allies that war is over in the Middle East while singling out Spain for not paying its own way. We're going to get the latest on the president's trip to the Netherlands, just wrapping the summit now, what it means for peace in the Middle East and Ukraine, with Bloomberg Washington correspondent Tyler Kendall. Republicans still working to find common ground on President Trump's big, beautiful bill. We're going to get the view of Jay Timmons a bit later on this hour. He runs the National Association of Manufacturers, which is now predicting 1 million jobs lost if the bill doesn't pass. It's a conversation you don't want to miss. And a shock win in New York's Democratic mayoral primary. This is something. We'll have analysis from our political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributor Jeannie Shanzano and Republican strategist Ashley Davis at S3 Group will be along. The music's run out, so we better get to Amy Morris. We start, as always, on Wall Street with her view of the markets. How is it, Amy?
All right, thanks, Joe. Well, the Wall Street Journal earlier reported Shell is holding early-stage talks to acquire rival BP. It would be the largest oil deal in a generation. Now, Bloomberg reported in May that Shell was considering those talks. Sources now say talks are active. BP is considering the approach carefully. U.S.-listed shares of BP are 6.5% higher. Shell ADR is down more than 3%. Let's check those markets for you. We do it all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 down 2 points, pretty much flat. NASDAQ is actually, it was up 2 points. NASDAQ also up 50 points. The Dow is down 69 points. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.32%. The 2-year yield at 3.79%. WTI crude is up 1.8%, trading at $65.56 a barrel. Brent crude up 1.7%, now trading at $68.31 a barrel. Fed Chair Jay Powell on Capitol Hill, a second day of congressional testimony. He stuck to his message that the central bank remains in wait-and-see mode. He also insists they have to move carefully until they know more about the impact of the tariffs.
One time could be the base case, but in a situation like this where the process could go on for a long time, where the effects could be large or small, it's just something you want to approach carefully in a world where inflation is not back to 2%. And that's our job. If we make a mistake here, people will pay the cost for a long time.
Fed Chair Jay Powell testifying before the Senate Banking Committee. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's go back to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew.
All right, Amy, many thanks. Welcome to the Wednesday edition of Balance of Power, the early edition here on Bloomberg Radio, satellite radio, channel 121 on Bloomberg Originals and on YouTube. I mean, how many more options do we need here? Go to YouTube, search Bloomberg Business News Live, and you'll find the radio program on TV, a revolutionary concept here at Bloomberg. As we count the ways, Donald Trump making his way from the NATO summit in the Netherlands, just boarding the jet. Are we wheels up, James? Air Force One wheels up, declares producer James, which makes it official around here. Having held a news conference a short time ago, making a lot of news in his trip, pretty brief trip to the Netherlands here with a celebratory dinner last night. Everybody was feeling good. The president made that clear. And today, holding a news conference on the way out in which he made news on a number of issues from the Fed to geopolitics. Of course, the focus of this summit, Iran, is something that everyone was asking about, and it does appear that talks are going to resume. The president says next week. Here he is.
Now this incredible exercise of American strength has paved the way for peace with a historic ceasefire agreement late Monday, and we call it the 12-day war. It's Spoke to a few people. I guess that just sounded like the right name. It was a 12-day war. And we think it's over. I don't think they're going to be going back at each other. I don't think so.
Not to be confused with the 7-day war. President Trump speaking with reporters. There are a couple of interesting exchanges with Bloomberg reporters today, including our own Josh Wingrove. Tyler Kendall is stateside here covering all of this and, of course, joins us frequently from the North Lawn of the White House, where it's 100 degrees today. She's with us in studio right now. Tyler, it's great to see you. Welcome back, as always. So let's get to this. Let's start with Iran. Are we talking about actual U.S. officials at a table next week? Are we talking intermediaries, or don't we know?
So that's one of the biggest questions here, because in President Trump's words, as we heard him from the NATO summit, he said that the war is effectively over, though we should note that we haven't seen a long-term negotiated settlement signed yet by either of these sides. And he said, in his words, that he's not in a rush for the nuclear talks to resume, but at the same time did confirm that the U.S. would be speaking with Iran next week. There's a lot of different threads that we could pull on here.
Yeah.
Another was that he had suggested that perhaps one of the biggest open questions, which is where is that stockpile of enriched uranium? He suggested that it was buried underground. We had heard this also previously from the Vice President, J.D. Vance, but so far from the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which keeps track of this, they've yet to verify that, and they say that their inspectors haven't yet reached the site where they are looking to survey the damage.
Yeah, interesting, because it is widely believed that it has gone missing somehow. The president says it's under concrete, steel, and granite, I think was his answer, which would be news if we could get some evidence toward that. With regard more broadly to the destruction of Iran's nuclear facility, it was really interesting to hear from the president, because he's talked about, obliterating this. My microphone is going away on me here. Both of our microphones need some love here. But the president insisting that it had been set back decades. Fordo all collapsed. But then he also said the intelligence was inconclusive. We don't know, he said. It could have been very severe. But I think we can take away, we don't know, it was very severe. What does that mean?
Right. We're weeding through the president's words here. He spent a lot of time disputing reports about this preliminary assessment, one that Bloomberg News had confirmed as well, that showed that there had been limited damage when it did come to these strikes. President Trump had said, in sort of his defense of this, that they should have waited to release this report. And I will also say that you had retired General Frank McKenzie on the late edition of Balance of Power yesterday, who also said that there should be some caution here when it does come to preliminary reports, because it ultimately does take time to survey the full extent of the damage. Now, sources familiar do tell Bloomberg News that this preliminary report finds that it set Iran's nuclear program back several months to potentially a year. And then we actually heard from the Israeli prime minister, who posted on X right before President Trump took the stage to give remarks, saying that it had set back Iran's ability to develop a nuclear weapon by many years. But of course, that is far from obliterated.
Yeah, well, true. And we just don't know still. And it could take some time. Following our conversation with General McKenzie last evening on the late edition of Balance of Power, it could be some time before we have any conclusive read on this. I want to get to NATO defense spending with you here, Tyler. The president did talk about this as well, 5% being the new target for our NATO allies. Not exactly everyone is on board. Here's Donald Trump from earlier.
In a very historic milestone this week, the NATO allies committed to dramatically increase their defense spending to that 5% of GDP, something that no one really thought possible. And they said, "You did it, sir, you did it." Well, I don't know if I did it, but I think I did.
Then there's Spain, which is sitting at 2% based on what we know. The president saying that we're going to have them pay for it through trade now. What do we know about this?
So that is still going to be an open question here. So some of these member nations, when it comes to the NATO alliance, have brought up concerns that, one, it's going to take a long time to actually get their spending up. And then also they're beholden to their own voters and constituencies. And perhaps they need to make sure that this is going to be viable domestically. We should also say our analysts at Bloomberg Economics, who are just amazing, they had already crunched the numbers on this, and they found that borrowing by these economies in order to finance this type of spending would add about $4.6 trillion to debt piles over the next decade. Now, keep in mind here, when it comes to Spain, President Trump had suggested that they could pay for this in some kind of trade deal. But of course, Spain is part of the European Union, which is negotiating as that 27-member nation bloc when it does come to the tariff. So we're still waiting on some sort of further details there, whether or not Spain could potentially be targeted in that broader EU trade deal. But just broadly going back to the idea of boosting defense spending, that really was a goal of President Trump's, one that he has lobbied for a pretty long time. He's touting this as a win. It is 5% goal, 5% of GDP. That contains 3.5% in what's known as core defense, really what you traditionally think of as defense spending, and then 1.5% in other sort of related investments. So think things like infrastructure or cybersecurity, Joe.
Which makes it a little bit easier to fudge based on some of the analysis that we've heard. But so what's the process here? You're steeped in this right now, Tyler. There's going to be an approval process on this. Everyone gets a vote or a say in this, or you just have a target out there and good luck. We'll see you at the next summit.
Well, we're going to have to see how the member countries move forward here as a group, because one of the really big points of this is that President Trump can say that this is a win. This is the win that he got when it comes to getting this firmer commitment to boost defense spending. But what the NATO alliance got, what the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte got, was that President Trump did pledge that he is committed to Article 5, which was kind of on shaky ground as he headed out to Marine One.
What was that all about? He said he would let people know when he got there. Nothing changed when he got there, did it?
Well, he said that Article 5 perhaps has a number of definitions, I think was the term.
Seems like a pretty clear definition.
He had used. Well, at the end, he did sort of put a pin in it, and he said, yes, the reason why I am here is because I support it. But it has been interesting to watch how NATO defense spending in particular has been such a core issue of President Trump's, because he brings it into all these other discussions. We hear him bring it in with the tariff deals as we're talking about Spain, but it is long something that he has said. Anytime there is a leader who is at the White House who is part of this alliance, he has made sure to bring that to top of mind.
Yeah, interesting. Enter President Zelensky. I need to ask you about Ukraine. He was never got the meeting at the G7 in Canada. Did they actually get together here? What happened with Ukraine?
So they did. They had a meeting. President Trump said it was good. In fact, he was asked about it afterwards during that press conference. It was interesting to hear him say this. He said that when it does come to ending the war in Ukraine, it is more difficult than other wars. And then he kind of put the pressure on the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, saying that it is up to him to end that war. Now, we know that the leaders have been in touch, perhaps in recent weeks, more between President Trump and the Russian president, since we know that Vladimir Putin had called him a few times about potentially mediating when it comes to the conflict in between Israel and Iran. But when it comes to this conflict, something that we know Ukraine was probably lobbying this president for, as well as NATO allies, what sort of security guarantees would the U.S. be willing to give if there is a negotiated settlement? This has long been a sticking point here. The White House has often talked about having an implicit guarantee. They signed the economic deal that gives them a vested economic interest in the country. But our NATO allies and Ukraine are looking for something a little bit firmer. He was asked if the U.S. would be willing to send over a Patriot missile battery, and he said that they would look into that. Yeah, he did. But he also said that the U.S. needs them, Israel needs them. There's a lot of other conflicts in the world right now.
I guess it's good to be Raytheon at this moment in time once again. Tyler, thank you for the readout. President's back. Any plans on the calendar for tomorrow? Anything specific before we run?
I think we're going to start to see the White House really ramping up the pressure when it comes to the reconciliation package. I will quickly say I caught up with Kevin Hassett earlier this week, who said
day do they vote?
That needs to get done first before we can talk about tariffs.
Well, we'll see if the July 4th deadline is intact with Tyler's help. Thanks always to Tyler Kendall, Bloomberg Washington correspondent. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Jay Timmons from the National Association of Manufacturers joins us next on Bloomberg.
It's 12:21 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris. Shell is in early stage talks to acquire BP. That, according to the Wall Street Journal, a potential deal would be among the largest in European history, creating a European oil major that could challenge industry leaders ExxonMobil and Chevron. The deal would be costly and could raise significant competition concerns. U.S. shares of Shell are 2% lower. U.S. shares of BP nearly 4% higher. We do check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. S&P 500 pretty much flat, down, it's flat. NASDAQ is up 0.1%. The Dow is down 0.2%. 10-year Treasury yield at 4.31%. The 2-year yield at 3.79%. And WTI crude is up 2% now, trading at $65.71 a barrel. Brent crude is up just about 2%, trading at $68.44 a barrel. Purchases of new homes in the U.S. fell in May to a 7-month low. Rampant builder price cuts and sales incentives fell short of alleviating affordability constraints. Sales of new single-family homes decreased 13.7%. That was below all estimates in a Bloomberg survey. Loop Capital predicts NVIDIA's value could reach $6 trillion. That's a 65% gain from its current $3.6 trillion market size. Analyst Ananda Barara raised NVIDIA's price target to $250, citing strong demand for its high-performance chips driven by AI adoption. NVIDIA shares now 2.7% higher. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's go back now to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew.
All right, Amy Morris, thank you so much, and great to have you with us in the conversation today, as always, on the fastest show in politics. Welcome to the Wednesday edition. I keep thinking it's Thursday because, well, this all started on Sunday here at Bloomberg with special coverage and our attention focused on Iran. Now that the president is making his way back from the Netherlands at the NATO summit, we are making a real shift back to Washington, domestic issues, and namely his big, beautiful bill. We've been talking about the bird bath, of course, all week, and some of the items that have already been knocked out of this legislation by the parliamentarian. But now it's time to get real in the Senate. We're looking at a vote that could come in the next couple of days. We just don't know. Remember, John Thune originally wanted to vote today. Then they thought maybe it would slide to Thursday. Then we said a Friday vote. That's the plan. Now we're hearing about a weekend vote-a-rama, maybe a Sunday vote. All of this could slide, which is making some folks nervous when it comes to the timeline. You know the drill. If you listen to this program, President Trump wants it on his desk by the 4th of July, and it's something that he's talked about quite a bit. Unclear if that's going to happen, because then the House has to take pretty much whatever the Senate passes back to them next week, codify the Senate to the president, and not a lot of folks are assuming that that's going to happen. Now, of course, if this bill does not pass, and everyone's got a problem with something inside of it, it's going to mean a big tax hike, the expiration of the Trump tax cuts from 2017. Enter Jay Timmons, the man who runs the National Association of Manufacturers, at the Treasury Department today, helping to push this along, but also out with new information from the association. What would it mean if this didn't pass? Say goodbye to 1 million manufacturing jobs. According to the research, Jay Timmons is with us now, the president of the National Association. It's great to see you. Welcome back, as always, to Bloomberg.
Good to see you, Joe.
This is pretty tough stuff, and I'm going to pull it up in front of me here. It's not just the jobs. It's $540 billion in lost wages, over $1 trillion in lost GDP. Yeah. Are you getting nervous that this is starting to slide too far?
You know, I'm not.
Yeah?
I am an eternal optimist, so that helps, especially when you're in Washington these days. But look, I mean, the economic impact is so devastating if this doesn't get through. Members of Congress, frankly, of both parties acknowledge that, even though this will end up being a partisan bill, and it will be a discussion among Republicans about what the final legislation looks like. But I'm really optimistic it's going to get done. And you had mentioned that the president wants to get it passed by Congress by July 4th. Right. I think he actually wants to sign it by July 4th.
That's what's on his desk, right? The fireworks are going to go off, Jay.
Exactly. I can see him choreographing the entire show.
Oh, absolutely. Do you care? You want to see this done by the end of the year, before the tax cuts potentially expire, right?
Oh, absolutely. So, look, the good news is...
Or does it need to happen by the 4th of July?
No, it does.
Okay.
It does, and let me tell you why. Yeah. First of all, let's talk about the good news. The good news is that the corporate rates that were instituted in 2017 remain intact. They're not messed around with in the bill. So they're permanent already. But the real problem we have, and those numbers that you cited from our study that we did with EY, that is as a result of some provisions that have already expired, and the part that is really devastating, which is the pass-through deduction for small businesses. If that expires, their tax rate goes up enormously.
What's already expired?
The R&D tax deduction, interest deductibility,
which you want to make
expensing, and so we want to make it permanent. And the Senate side has done that, so that's why we really like the Senate bill. We love the House bill too. They did yeoman's work there. They got literally all 10 of our key priorities in that bill. The Senate retained them and actually made them better. There are still a few issues that we'd like to see resolved in the Senate bill. But that permanency is really important, right? And when you ask, is it okay to get it done at the end of the year versus say now?
Your members say no.
Well, here's why, right? You're talking about multi-billion-dollar, hundreds of billions of dollars in planning for investments here in the United States. You don't just do that with a flip of the light switch, right? So frankly, I'm worried that it's already too late to plan for 2026 and 2027. But hopefully, if we get it done now, they can make those plans for those investments.
Interesting. We talk about permanence with regard to business tax cuts. This has been a drive on the Senate side, to your point. It's about to come back to the House, where they want to have a $40,000 cap on salt. And this is where the push and pull starts to, I say they, a small group of lawmakers from states like New York and New Jersey. You know how delicate this whole balance is. If you make the tax cuts permanent, that gets to be a lot more difficult to pay for the salt deduction. This is the debate that's happening right now. And if you could bring us in the room, what are you hearing from lawmakers when you talk about this?
So here's the interesting thing. If you look at the House and how they had to arrive at their final numbers, they have one way that they're measuring revenue. The Senate has a different policy.
This is the current baseline.
Yeah,
we walk out hard on this show, so people will actually know what you're talking about.
Well, so look,
assuming the parliamentarian
we like current policy, right?
And you want the current policy baseline.
The Senate side, right? The way they're scoring it, and that gives them a little bit more flexibility. Now, I don't know how much flexibility. I understand what members of Congress are pushing for when they represent states that have, where they want a higher limit on the salt deduction. For us, though, our number one priority is, you might guess, is we want to make sure that those business taxes are permanent, so that, again, businesses can plan for the future.
Yes, right.
We're all in on the president's call for growing more manufacturing here in the United States. That has been a consistent thread through every administration, Republican and Democrat, for as long as I've been in this job. But President Trump is probably a bigger champion than anybody I've ever seen of making sure that we grow domestic manufacturing. But we can only do that if we have a comprehensive manufacturing strategy, which involves permanence on the tax front. Also involves modernized regulations. It involves a smart trade policy. It involves workforce development, and I would argue it also involves having immigration reform of some type.
Well, that's actually fascinating. And well, you are speaking Donald Trump's language there, I suppose. Is he about to pick up the phone? Do you want him to push this thing over the top? A lot of people say,
I have a feeling he's
the
going
only
to.
one who's going to do it.
I mean, don't you think he's probably going to?
Well,
do that,
yeah.
Joe? I mean, he
just wait till Friday. Watch Truth Social and see where we are.
He is not shy about picking up the phone and telling members of Congress what he would like to see them do. And frankly, on this, we're going to agree pretty strongly with the president that this needs to get across the line.
Yes.
And again, you cited those macro numbers, but we've broken it down state by state, district by district. So members know exactly what is at stake here in terms of the number of manufacturing jobs that they will lose in their congressional district if they vote no, right? How much investment could potentially be lost? All that information is there for them to see. We have a calculator on our website. And by the way, anybody can go to that and take a look at what does that mean for them back home.
Well, that's fascinating. So when Jay Timmons is walking the halls of Congress, they know you're coming with some pretty hard truths. What's the more difficult meeting right now, when you're knocking on doors on the Senate side or the House side? Because it seems like the nerves are on the House side, knowing that they might have to swallow whatever comes back. They might need a guy like Jay Timmons to remind them of what's at stake here.
So You know, thank you, but it's actually the people in their districts that really matter, right? It's the folks that are on those shop floors.
Are they calling?
They are.
Yeah.
And they are flooding congressional offices with messages of, hey, please support this bill. It's important for my job. It's also important for the health and strength and vitality of our community. I think members of Congress understand that.
Yeah.
Again, I don't blame members of Congress for trying to get something that is very parochial to their district. That makes perfect sense to me. In the end, we have to think about what is in the national interest. Getting this bill across the line is definitely in our national interest, as far as economic security, and I would argue national security as well.
Debt and deficits bother you at all?
Yeah, they definitely bother me, and I think we're going to have to take a hard look at spending. But look, here's one thing I learned from George Allen, who was my mentor, and he was the governor of Virginia. I was his chief of staff. You know, we were confronted with similar issues in Virginia, where you have to have a balanced budget. It's a requirement constitutionally in Virginia. And he said, look, you know, budgets are about priorities. And what is our number one priority? Our number one priority is to grow the economy so that more people benefit. We can have more taxpayers actually putting money into the Treasury so we can grow programs that help more people. So I think we have to identify that strengthening the business outlook in this country, the job-creating outlook in this country, and investment outlook is better for the American people as a whole. And then we can start looking at how do we manage the growth of some of these other programs that I would argue many of those are obviously very, very important. But you have to have the money and the revenue in order to fund those programs. And that's what we want to do in the business community, right? We want to grow jobs. We want to grow the U.S. Treasury.
We've spent the balance of this conversation with Jay Timmons talking about uncertainty for business, trying to make plans for the rest of this year. Tariffs play into that as well. How concerned are you about July 9th? What's going to happen? What are they telling you out of the administration? What to prepare for?
You know, isn't it funny? You heard all along the way that, well, this bill's not going to pass the House. Well, the bill's not going to pass the Senate. Right now, Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the White House, and they are very unified. And the president is pushing the members of Congress to get things done on the tax side.
Yeah.
I think he's probably just as eager to get the 89 agreements that are still outstanding done. He said he wanted to get them done by July the 9th. We certainly hope he can.
Yeah. How about extend this again if they're not all done?
Well, that's uncertain. That creates uncertainty too, right?
So you'd just like to meet the deadline.
I want to see this get done. I want to see it get done in a way that benefits manufacturers in the United States, certainly, because I represent manufacturers in the United States, and what's good for American consumers as well. One of the things that I think has been a bit of a hiccup.
Yeah, just have 30 seconds.
So we need to make sure that we can actually incentivize investment. So we have a proposal to provide an investment accelerator. And we're going to be sharing
a rebate,
that with
essentially.
you in a minute.
Talk to us more about that, Jay. That's fascinating. Jay Timmons, National Association of Manufacturers. Stay close to us for this process. Good to see you, as always. This is Bloomberg.
1240 on Wall Street, I'm Amy Morris. The Wall Street Journal reporting Shell holding early stage talks to acquire rival BP in what would be the largest oil deal in a generation. However, Shell now says no such talks are happening. Bloomberg had reported in May that Shell was considering the talks. U.S.-listed shares of BP now more than 3.5% higher. Shell ADRs down 1.5%. Purchasers of new homes in the U.S. fell in May to a 7-month low. Rampant builder price cuts and sales incentives fell short of alleviating affordability constraints. Sales of new single-family homes decreased 13.7%. That's below all estimates in a Bloomberg survey. Home builders are struggling to maintain their order books amid mounting economic challenges, including mortgage rates stuck near 7%, higher materials costs because of tariffs, and a slowing labor market. We do check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 is up 1 point. NASDAQ up 44 points. The Dow down 84 points. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.31%. The 2-year yield at 3.79%. Bumble plans to reduce its global workforce by about 240 roles. That's about 30% of the company. It also boosted its adjusted EBITDA guidance for the second quarter. That guidance beat the average analyst estimate. Shares of Bumble now 19% higher. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's go back to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew.
All right, Amy, thank you so much. On a sweltering day here in the nation's capital, the temperature in Washington, 96 degrees. How are we doing in New York here? Because New York's had us beat this week, 98. The Amtrak corridor is still under the heat dome as we try to figure out our way forward on so many issues from the NATO summit. The president's in the air right now on his way back from the Netherlands. Apparently, talks with Iran will resume next week. Big news today at the summit as the president says war is over in the Middle East. Sounding like John Lennon today as he reaches for the Nobel Peace Prize. All the while, things are getting set up for the president when he gets home. It's going to be a big turn to reconciliation. His big, beautiful bill, which we were just talking about with Jay Timmons. And I'm very curious to hear what the president has to say about what's going on in New York. Some of the tip sheets this morning were comparing his relationship right now with the mayor of L.A. or the governor of New York or California. In the case of the protests, imagine if Mr. Mamdani is Mayor Mamdani and what that push and pull is going to be like. If you don't know what I'm talking about, the Democratic primary for New York mayor took place last night, and it was a doozy, a blowout. Look at the headlines. I just searched Mamdani on the terminal. Shock win, says Bloomberg, a rebuke of the establishment. How Mamdani turned youth and inexperience into assets. New York Times, Mamdani stuns Cuomo in New York mayoral primary. Yeah, this was an upset. And if you're Andrew Cuomo and you thought your political comeback was on track, all the polls said so, it was Cuomo's race to lose, well, he lost it. Listen.
Tonight was not our night. Tonight was Assemblyman Mamdani's night, and he put together a great campaign. I called him. I congratulated him. I applaud him sincerely for his effort, and let's give him a round of applause.
All right, a round of applause. Andrew Cuomo saying that he loved everyone that night in the audience. That was just hours ago, having just been beaten by a 33-year-old Democratic socialist from Queens. Mr. Cuomo's got to be doing some soul-searching today. 44% to 36%, the New York Times calling it an earthquake victory. Mamdani using the words of Nelson Mandela as he addressed his supporters last night. Let's bring it back to the victory party.
Tonight, we made history. An hour ago, I spoke with Andrew Cuomo about the need to bring this city together. We have won because New Yorkers have stood up for a city they can afford.
There it is. Now, as we've told you, don't take it to the bank yet. Because while the Democratic primary would traditionally pretty much call the race in New York City, you've still got Eric Adams with an independent bid. And what's Andrew Cuomo going to do? Because when he starts reading through the returns and sees the strength on the Upper East Side, the Upper West Side, maybe he goes independent as well. We have a lot of questions about the way this goes, and we want to bring in our political panel on this because this is a fascinating moment in American politics. Jeannie Shanzano is in New York right now, our New York whisperer and Bloomberg Politics contributor, senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. And glad to say Ashley Davis is back, Republican strategist and partner at S3 Group. Great to see you both. Welcome, as always.
Hey there.
Jeannie, what the heck happened? How are the pollsters so wrong? And is your answer ranked choice voting?
Yeah, the pollsters have egg on their face today for the most part. This was an earthquake, to use the New York Times words. And I do agree with former Governor Cuomo. Mamdani ran a great campaign. He focused on an issue that is not new in New York City, that is affordability. We all remember, Jimmy McMillan, the rent is too damn high candidate. It is the same campaign. But he did it with incredible use of social media, jumping into the water to talk about freezing rent. He is a very attractive candidate. But the problem with what he's saying is, can he deliver on these promises? And the answer is likely no, because his answer to everything is raise taxes. And that is not something that New York City needs. And of course, he also, and I point to Laura Gillen's really important statement. She's from the 4th District. She says he has talked about defunding the police, something he walked back from. He's also had to walk back some really concerning anti-Semitic statements. And so This is a problematic candidate. He is a great campaigner. But again, if you want to be realistic, can he deliver? Probably not. And it is very alarming.
Okay, so again, let's not take this to the bank yet. Andrew Cuomo's listening, Jeannie. The analysis in Politico says it all here, Ashley. Mamdani has promised free buses, free childcare, city-run grocery stores, rent freezes. Yes, the rent is still too damn high. Wealth taxes, and more pledges like this, Ashley, that make Republicans bristle. Forget the doom scroll on his social media right now. How do you get elected in New York City running against Andrew Cuomo with a platform like that?
Well, I think, number one, that people are tired of the establishment candidates. You saw this during the Republican primary, even for president. You saw it with New York. I mean, the question is, do people really get out and vote because they believed the polls and Cuomo was supposed to win? And so we're only his people energized to come out to vote. But listen, I think the happiest person today should be Eric Adams. I mean, if he has a true organized independent campaign, I think it's very hard for a Republican, obviously, to win there. So if you're going against Eric Adams and as an independent, if he puts together a good team and can actually get out the vote, people may wake up and be like, you know what, that alternative's definitely better than what this guy's over here saying, because obviously, as Jeannie said, his promises just are not very easy to ever fulfill. But my other question, my other really big thought here that I've been thinking of is, everyone here in Washington says, Schumer's toast, AOC was the big winner, she was the one who endorsed him. Here's what I think. Two things. Schumer is not up for another 3.5 years. He's up in 2028, and there's plenty of time for if he really does become mayor. How much time do we have until the city goes completely down the tube in regards to people not wanting to have that type of socialist policies? And someone like Schumer could win again. So I don't believe that rhetoric today.
Interesting. Well, whether he's running against Andrew Cuomo or Eric Adams, Jeannie, there does seem to be a feel, as I think Ashley is pointing to, about the so-called establishment candidate, and maybe nobody brought that forth last night in quite the same way as Brad Lander. Of course, another candidate for mayor. He's New York City's controller. This is the same Lander who was arrested by ICE agents, I think, a week ago. I believe we were talking to Ashley and Jeannie about that at the time. He had quite a message for the former governor of New York following the results rolling in last night. Listen.
Andrew Cuomo is in the past. He is not the present or future of New York City. Good riddance.
Okay, so I don't know what it was about the F words in politics yesterday, Jeannie, echoing the President of the United States. I guess it's going around for everybody here. But is he right when he talks about the former governor?
I would never count Andrew Cuomo out completely. He did not run a great campaign. It may have been too soon for him to try to have this resurrection. But let's be clear, he may still run as an independent. We don't know yet. He did run on 2 lines, and so he has that other line to run on. But I wouldn't count him out. He is a very, very good political mind. He's got a lot of support. And let's be clear, whether Andrew Cuomo runs again or not, whatever his future, the moderates in the Democratic Party have a path forward. I think what we learned last night is that candidates matter an awful lot, as do campaigns. Mamdani showed up, and he showed up big. He's a very attractive candidate. Andrew Cuomo perennially, I go back to his first run for governor. That's how old I'm feeling. He doesn't show up for the media a lot. And so he's a good manager, not a great campaigner. But we still have, as we look to Virginia, Abigail Spanberger. We still look at New Jersey. We have Mickey Sherrill. These are centrist candidates. Very different than Mamdani in terms of policy, but what they're similar on is they are attractive candidates and really good campaigners. So I don't know if this speaks to sort of the death of the moderate wing of the Democratic Party or the fact that centrists have gone and we are now looking at, the rise of socialists. I don't think so. Yeah. The reality is probably Mamdani, if he does win, is not going to be able to realize these very, very wild promises he has made. And you listed some of them, Joe, from free busing to free groceries. When your billionaires move out of New York City, who are you going to tax to pay for everything? Affordability is a problem, for sure. It's a huge problem, but we need common sense, doable solutions to it, not this pie in the sky. We're going to tax everybody to death to get there.
It is interesting, Jeannie, because Michelle Wu, now the mayor of Boston, ran on a lot of these same issues and has been incredibly successful. But New York is not Boston. And by the way, they're still paying for the tea. If you're listening to us on 92.9, you know what I'm talking about. We heard from Elise Stefanik last evening, Ashley, on X. A radical, she writes, defund the police, communist, raging anti-Semite will most likely win the New York Democrat mayoral primary. Voters will say enough is enough next year. Are we supposed to look at this as a barometer for domestic politics right now? Are we reading into this too far? Is this a bellwether or not?
No, I agree with Jeannie. I mean, Abigail Spanberger is a fantastic candidate for the Democrat side in Virginia. I mean, I think she is very moderate. This was an exception, I think, than the rest of the races that were important over the last couple weeks. But I do think that someone else who did win last night is potentially Elise. And because if Elise does, which everyone thinks she's going to be running for governor against the current governor, it gives her a lot to run against if he ends up being the mayor. I mean, she's going to love to just bang the drum on that for the next 18 months, which sets her up.
That's for sure.
For her run.
Yep, she's looking forward to this, and I wonder how SALT is going to play into it. Maybe we'll get into that in our next hour, because Mike Lawler was really hoping to have a $40,000 cap to run on here, Jeannie. In our remaining moment, do you think he's going to get it?
I think I don't think so. I don't see how they do it. But boy, to Ashley's point, that's going to be a great primary. If it's Stefanik versus Lawler, I'm looking forward to that, let alone the general. If whichever one of them wins, it goes against Hochul. It's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, on X last evening, New York Governor Kathy Hochul. Today, voters made their voices heard, demanding a more affordable and more livable New York City. I hear them loud and clear. You wonder what that means for congestion pricing, but that's another show, I think. Jeannie and Ashley, great conversation. They're going to be back in our second hour, of course, as always, as we reassemble the panel for a lot more to talk about here. And we will, in our next hour, be getting into a lot more with the president leaving the NATO summit, geopolitics on the menu here, as he tells us that talks will resume with Iran next week. We were bombing them on Saturday night. We'll have a lot more on this with an update ahead from Tyler Kendall. And as we look to reconciliation, Congressman Brian Stile, the Republican from Wisconsin, is going to join us, member of the House Financial Services Committee, with his view on SALT and a lot of the other issues that need to still be hammered out on the president's big, beautiful bill. I'm Joe Matthew. Kaylee Lyons on the way in on Bloomberg.
From Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
President Trump heads home from the NATO summit with Iran talks now on the calendar. Welcome to the Wednesday edition of Balance of Power as the president flies back to the U.S., where the focus now shifts back to his big, beautiful bill. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. We thank you for joining us. Kaylee, it's interesting, as we turn back to what's happening on Capitol Hill, there is a great concern that this is starting to slide. They might not make their July 4 deadline.
Yeah, the deadline, of course, of July 4th being when the president would like to sign this massive legislative package. That would mean not only does it have to get through the Senate, but repass the House of Representatives. And both things are very much in question in terms of timeline. The parliamentarian has yet to finish its work, decide what actually can be in the bill. We haven't seen the text yet of the finance package in full because the parliamentarians still working through those measures, and then you have to put this whole thing back together again. A vote-a-rama was looking like it was the goal this weekend, but I guess many things are still in flux.
Well, and they've got a Monday recess to look forward to in the Senate. There's a question about whether they even make that, because either way, it would be a working weekend. This still has to go back to the House, Kaylee, for it to get to the president's desk by the 4th of July. And we'll see what Brian Stile thinks about that. We're going to get the view from the other chamber. The Republican from Wisconsin will join us coming up here on Bloomberg.
Yeah, knowing that a handful of his colleagues, specifically from high-tax blue states that happen to be Republicans holding on to seats in those states, met with Treasury officials and Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, today to talk specifically about SALT as they try to figure out if they can get a deal that keeps them happy while also keeping senators who do not care about SALT whatsoever happy as well.
We're never getting rid of this story. It's the gift that keeps giving, I guess, for Bloomberg, although at some point they're going to have to settle on a number. We'll see what Brian Stile thinks ahead.
Indeed, we will. First, though, we begin with a check on the markets, as always, and for that we turn to Amy Morris in Washington, D.C. Hey, Amy.
Hey, Kaylee. Shell is denying a Wall Street Journal report that it's in active talks about acquiring its London-based oil rival, BP. A Shell spokesperson telling Bloomberg, quote, "This is further market speculation. No talks are taking place." Speculation was growing that the embattled company, BP, would become a takeover target, although its size and complexity would make any deal challenging. Bloomberg reported in May Shell had been studying the merits of a takeover but was waiting for further stock and oil price declines before deciding whether to pursue a bid. U.S. shares of Shell now less than 1% lower. U.S. shares of BP more than 1.5% higher. We do check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 is flat. NASDAQ is up 52 points. The Dow now down 134 points. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.3% and the 2-year yield at 3.79%. BlackBerry shares 15% higher after the software company boosted its revenue forecast for the full year. Analysts were positive about the company's forecast and hiked their price target on the stock. Reddit shares more than 2% higher, now up more than 60% off its April low. RBC Capital Markets wrote that it wouldn't be surprised to see momentum for Reddit turn it into a strong earnings report. Investors have been sounding more positive on the stock. And Bumble plans to reduce its global workforce by about 240 roles. That represents about 30% of the company. Bumble also boosted its adjusted EBITDA guidance for the second quarter. The guidance beat the average analyst estimate, so now shares of Bumble about 23% higher. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's go back to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines.
All right, Amy Morris, thank you so much. Here with us in Washington, where President Trump, of course, is en route back to, having just attended the NATO summit at The Hague in the Netherlands, where he held an extensive press conference earlier today, having had all NATO countries except Spain agree to increase their defense spending target to 5% of GDP, a major victory for President Trump, something that he was pushing for. But he, of course, took the time to tout another thing he sees as a victory, which is the ceasefire that, as of right now, is still holding between Israel and Iran, and what he maintains was the U.S.'s total obliteration of Iran's nuclear facilities with the weekend strikes, though, of course, he's pushing back against early intelligence reports that suggest that may not have been the case in terms of total obliteration. But let's listen to the words from President Trump himself as to how he characterized the end, he says, of what he's describing as the 12-day war.
Now this incredible exercise of American strength has paved the way for peace with a historic ceasefire agreement late Monday, and we call it the 12-day war. Spoke to a few people. I guess that just sounded like the right name. It was a 12-day war. And we think it's over. I don't think they're going to be going back at each other. I don't think so.
We think it's over. Answering, I guess, some questions about what appeared to be the fragility of this ceasefire. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, Washington correspondent, has been following along with the president's travels and joins us now here in studio. It is 100 degrees on the north lawn of the White House, Tyler. I'm glad you could be with us here. Speak to the fragility of this ceasefire or not, knowing that apparently we have talks scheduled with Iran next week.
Right. So as you heard President Trump, he said that he thinks that the war is over, but we have to keep in mind both sides haven't signed any sort of long-term negotiated agreement here. And that's going to be one of the things that we're watching for going forward if there is going to be some sort of sustained agreement. Now, Now, President Trump did say that the U.S. will have talks with Iran next week, but we do not know who will be involved in those talks, and we didn't get any details about whether or not those are going to be direct or indirect talks. But I pulled one of his quotes. He said, "I don't care if we have an agreement or not. What we want is no nuclear." So if we take the president's argument that these strikes did enough to deter Iran's nuclear program, he is suggesting that he's not too in a hurry to resume the spoken negotiations.
Yeah, I wonder what you talk about then if the objective at the end of those talks is not some kind of agreement. If
Especially
he thinks
since we were bombing them 4 days ago.
Unnecessary. Yeah, we have a lot of questions about that, Tyler. But of course, we weren't expecting that it was the Middle East that was going to feature as a top priority item on the president's trip to the Netherlands for this NATO summit. You would have thought there would be much more about Russia and Ukraine and NATO as an alliance and defense spending, though we did hear about that today as well.
Right. Well, President Trump really did try to tout this visit as a win because he did get that pledge of 5% GDP from these NATO allies, except, of course, as you had mentioned, Spain does seem to be the outlier here, though in a statement afterwards, they did try to downplay President Trump's comments against them. We should say this 5% total, 3.5% is core defense. That's what we traditionally think of when it comes to defense spending. But perhaps there might be a little bit of leeway here because it does account for about 1.5% in additional investments, whether or not that would be infrastructure or something like cybersecurity. And I spoke with this with Joe last hour on this program, but it's pretty remarkable because our analysts at Bloomberg Economics have already crunched the numbers. We have to keep in mind that this pledge comes at a time when a lot of European countries are already grappling with some pretty high levels of public debt, and they found that in order to finance this, the spending would add $4.6 trillion to debt piles in the next 10 years. So that's sort of the economic backdrop to what President Trump really is touting as a win here, because he has long called for these countries to boost their defense spending.
Fascinating. President's on the way back. What's he doing when he gets home? Is it all about the big, beautiful bill? Does he make a visit to the Hill this week?
I think that could be in the pipeline. We know that the Treasury Secretary was on the Hill yesterday. He was meeting with the so-called SALT caucus today because at the moment, as you both know, the Senate bill doesn't have enough votes to pass that chamber, and they have to get it done maybe by this weekend in order for it to be kicked back to the House and on the president's desk by next Friday.
All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, Washington correspondent, here with us in our D.C. studio. Thank you so much. And as we consider the prospects for that one big, beautiful bill, the president's legislative agenda, we go live now to Capitol Hill, where Republican Congressman Brian Stile of Wisconsin is joining us. He's chair of the House Administration Committee, also sits on the Financial Services Committee, where he's the chair of the subcommittee on digital assets. Congressman, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm sure you and your colleagues are trying your best to keep up with how this is proceeding in the Senate, which seems to be not as quickly as everyone had initially hoped. Are you expecting that you're going to have to forfeit your July 4th holiday?
I'd like to keep us in town until we get the task done. I think all of us want to see the one big, beautiful bill signed into law by President Trump by July 4th. But the reason for that is we need to really get the U.S. economy growing again. How do we do that? Making these tax cuts that were originally put into place in 2017 permanent, making the energy reforms that are in the bill into law, and making sure we continue to build on the success of securing the U.S.-Mexico border. And so it's positive news. The Senate is moving forward. The Senate's a little slow, but the Senate's making progress. It puts us in a position to get this all the way across the line.
What do you make of this whole SALT controversy or debate at this point? Congressman, you already went through it in the House. You guys hammered it out. The Ways and Means Committee said 30. The final deal was $40,000 up from 10, which the New York and New Jersey, California delegations were pretty happy about. Your colleague Mike Lawler spoke with us about it, Congressman Lilota and others who are very happy to be able to bring this home to their constituents. The Senate doesn't see it this way, and so we're renewing this whole conversation. Apparently, we're going to go through this all over again. What do your constituents, what do the people at the Deer Camp bar tonight think about helping New Yorkers subsidize their taxes?
It's a little early for deer season, but I'll talk to you about the fishing camp. I think at the end of the day, what we don't want to do is be subsidizing inefficient states in local government. You can just look at who came out of the Democratic primary for mayor in New York, recognizing when tax costs go up, we don't want to see the federal government subsidizing that. So I'm on the side of bringing the SALT deduction down. That said, there was a negotiation put in place in the House. $40,000 was the agreed upon amount. Not everyone got everything they wanted, in the House version of the one big beautiful bill. Now the Senate is having their chance to have a conversation on this exact same topic. We're going to look to see what the Senate gets out, and at the end of the day, we have to have a bill that passes both the House and the Senate. I'm on the side I'd like to bring the SALT tax deduction down, but no one is going to have their way unilaterally.
Well, and obviously bringing the SALT deduction down is one way to bring down the total price tag of this package. Congressman, there is a very real chance that what comes out of the Senate is heftier in terms of price tag than what you and your colleagues passed in the House. Are we still going to be able to call it fiscally responsible legislation once the Senate's done?
Well, we had a problem, I know, with the birdbath as it relates to some of the cost savings on some critical programs to make sure that they're focused in on those that they were truly designed for. That's true in SNAP benefits, in some other areas. As it relates to the tax benefits, I think putting in place additional pro-growth tax policies is actually a win for the American public at the end of the day. And so there's two aspects of this. There's one is the cost savings from the spending side. There's frustration that the Senate rules didn't allow some of those provisions to be brought into the final package. On the tax side, we need to make sure that we are keeping in place those tax cuts from 2017, making them permanent. And the reason for that is because that's what is going to drive forward economic growth, and it's economic growth that will actually generate larger tax revenues in the future, in the same way that we saw tax revenues actually increase going into the pandemic after the implementation of the 2017 tax cuts.
Well, let's assume your colleagues in the Senate get their work done here in the next couple of days. Congressman, maybe you're hearing something you can tell us about there in terms of the cadence in the Senate, although I know it's a bit difficult to predict. There are a lot of headlines out there that the Senate is about to jam the House, and I'm sure you love reading those. What's really about to happen? I guess there won't be a conference committee. What happens when that legislation comes back your way?
Well, the Senate is really building on the House product, and so I don't view this as the Senate being in a position to jam the House. The Senate is making adjustments and amendments to a House product. So it origined in the House. I think that's a positive thing. When these adjustments come back, it'll be an opportunity for us to most likely have an up or down vote. Overall, like I said, no one's going to get 100% of what they want in this legislation. The question of the vote is going to be, does the bill at its core move the country in the right direction? I believe the House version did, and I'm optimistic I'll be able to reach the same conclusion when the Senate bill is finalized.
I'd like to ask you about another subject area in which the House and Senate are going to have to figure out how to align themselves, Congressman, knowing you chair the subcommittee on digital assets. The Senate obviously passed the Genius Act stablecoin legislation last week. They would like to see that passed as a standalone measure in the House as well, though I know the committee is considering combining it with market structure legislation. And we had the chance to speak with Republican Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee, who of course championed that legislation in the Senate, about the idea of combining these two things yesterday. This is what he told us, sir, and we'll have you respond.
It's going to be complicated here because of two committees that have to be involved in this, and it's going to take more time. I think my advice to everybody would be, let's take the win now, let's build momentum, and then let's dedicate our time to going further as market structure and other opportunities present themselves. But right now, timing is critical for a number of reasons. We want to get this started, we want to get this moving, and again, open up this new market for digital assets.
So, Congressman, like we originally were discussing with reconciliation, one bill or two, do you still maintain that this should be one bill, not two?
Strategically, I think we're actually all aligned. The president wants to actually see three pieces of crypto legislation on his desk before the August recess. That's stablecoin market structure legislation and blocking a CBDC being developed at the Fed. As it relates to the first two bills, we need to make sure that we stay focused strategically on getting both of those passed and across the line. The House has been hard at work at market structure, even passing a market structure bill last Congress, garnering over 70 Democratic votes on the House floor. The Senate, encouragingly, has begun engaging in this debate very recently. It's positive that we're seeing movement in the Senate in that regard, but I think at the end of the day, the tactical decision needs to be made based on how we get both bills across the line and signed into law.
So you're open to passing a standalone stablecoin bill or sending that to the president's desk without, in fact, marrying these two together?
I want to make sure that the plan ends with both bills being signed into law. The Senate often is slow, as we've discussed before, on a whole host of topics and legislation. I want to make sure that we are moving both bills to signature to the president as fast as we can and taking an opportunity here with the momentum that's being built on in the Senate by the passage of the Genius Act to make sure that both pieces of legislation are signed into law by President Trump before the August recess.
Well, that covers us on your chairmanship of the Digital Assets Subcommittee, sir, but you also, of course, chair the House Committee on Administration, which puts you in the conversations around security for members in the aftermath of the shootings of those Minnesota state lawmakers earlier this month, knowing there is also a live conversation around risks of potential terrorism here at home in the aftermath of the U.S.'s attacks on Iran. What do we need to know about the conversation that is being had currently about making sure our elected representatives are secure inside the Capitol and beyond it?
As chairman of administration, I've continued to have conversations with a large number of individuals to make sure that we keep not only members and their families safe, but we keep staff and visitors safe as well. Here on Capitol Hill, we're in a reasonably good position. The United States Capitol Police have an incredibly difficult job of keeping Capitol Hill open and accessible to the American public while keeping it safe. Back home in members' districts, sometimes there is a unique challenge. It's brought to light by the horrific events that occurred in the state of Minnesota last weekend. And so what we're doing is reevaluating the security positions that we have to make sure that members and their families are safe in their home districts. It's essential that everyone not only feels safe, but is safe. And that's incredibly important in a period of time of heightened political rhetoric and some of the security challenges that we face globally right now.
Well, that's fascinating, Congressman. Should this be a case-by-case situation when it comes to applying these resources? Or if you're a member of Congress, do you get a security detail?
The best way to handle the security measure is a risk-based analysis, not to do it in a blanket one-size-fits-all approach, but to make sure that we are meeting the needs. There's a number of resources that are already available on Capitol Hill to make sure not only, again, that members, but also staff and visitors are safe. We need to make sure that people are taking advantage of those, making sure that they're doing the work to protect themselves, and to make sure that we do have the abundance of resources to make sure that we are doing everything we can to keep individuals safe. In a period of time with heightened rhetoric, with some of the geopolitical challenges that we have across the globe, it's of paramount importance that we're maintaining and protecting our democracy by protecting those individuals that step up to serve the country.
It's good to have you back, Congressman. Brian Stile, the Republican from Wisconsin's 1st District, chairman of the committee, indeed, on House Administration. Good to have you back on Bloomberg TV and radio. Kaylee, we need to turn to geopolitics as well. As the president returns home to deal with the very matters we were just discussing with Brian Stile and reconciliation, he's leaving a NATO summit. And apparently, Iran talks on the calendar for next week. We just have no details on that. To think that we've come this far from striking that country in a matter of days is amazing.
Yeah, no details on who will be attending those talks or what the intended outcome is. As President Trump suggested, some kind of diplomatic agreement on the nuclear program may not be necessary. We'll have more with our political panel ahead here on Bloomberg.
It's 121 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris. NVIDIA shares rising 3.8% to post its first intraday record since January. Loop Capital predicts NVIDIA's value could reach $6 trillion. Purchases of new homes in the U.S. fell in May to a 7-month low. Sales of new single-family homes decreased 13.7%, below all estimates in a Bloomberg survey. We do check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 is up 1.5 points. NASDAQ is up 59 points, and the Dow is down 129 points. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.31%, the 2-year yield at 3.79%. Micron Technology shares have roughly doubled since the S&P 500 bottomed in April, driven by high bandwidth memory chips vital to AI computing. The company is expected to report adjusted earnings per share of $1.60 on revenue of about $8.9 billion, with investors focusing on production, supply constraints, and profitability. Shares of Micron Technology less than 1% lower at this hour, and Shell is denying that Wall Street Journal report that it is in active talks about acquiring its London-based oil rival, BP. The Shell spokesperson tells Bloomberg, quote, "This is further market speculation. No talks are taking place. U.S. shares of Shell less than 1% lower. U.S. shares of BP are nearly 2% higher." For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's go back to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines.
All right, Amy Morris, thank you so much. Checking on the markets for us as we continue to keep an eye on all things politics, both domestic and geopolitics. Of course, President Trump is doing the same as he makes his way back from The Hague in the Netherlands, where he attended the NATO summit. He's on Air Force One, which, as we've learned and certainly saw on display yesterday, happens to be one of his favorite times to post on True Social on a number of subjects. Just a few minutes ago aboard the aircraft, President Trump tweeting about the U.S.'s what he calls obliteration of Iran's nuclear sites over this past weekend. He says the following, quote, "Israel just stated that the nuclear sites were obliterated. Thank you to our great B-2 pilots and all others involved," doubling down on this obliteration language after, of course, the leaking yesterday of early reports from the Pentagon's own intelligence suggestions that said that the preliminary read was that the U.S. actually had only set Iran's nuclear program back by a few months. That is something that today, Joe, while at the NATO summit and again on social media, the president has pushed back strongly against.
Despite some mixed messages earlier at the NATO summit, when you actually read through what he said, insisting the program had been set back decades, not forever, that Fordo was all collapsed, then he went on to acknowledge the intelligence, this is a quote, was very inconclusive. We don't know, he said. It could have been very severe. So I guess that's correct, but I think we can take away that we don't know. So this is something that's still rattling around his mind here, and I guess he's got some reinforcement from officials in Israel. We wanted to play this to the panel along with the full-on reaction at this NATO summit to what just took place between Israel, Iran, and the U.S. Bloomberg Politics contributor Jeannie Shanzano is with us, Democratic analyst and, of course, senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, and Republican strategist Ashley Davis with S3 Group, partner with us as well. It's great to have both of you back for our conversation. Ashley, what do you make of this? You spent enough time in the national security space. You've had a security clearance. You understand the sensitivity of this information, and the administration is telling us that these reports from the likes of the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, about the intelligence telling us something other than the nuclear program was obliterated. Is this half-baked? Is it preliminary? How should we read it?
Yes, absolutely, Joe. And as you would expect, this one gets my blood boiling because I'm so happy that the FBI is investigating who leaked this information, because talking about something that could hurt our national security is, it's just unbelievable that this is where some of these people are and that they're working for our government. But there's 17 other areas of the intelligence community that are also reviewing what happened in Iran, and this is one of the 17. So we have 16 more definitely preliminary information. But it's frustrating me. Sorry, I'm getting a little my temper's coming out, because it's like our U.S. military had just done an unbelievable campaign with no American soldiers getting hurt, with the strongest military in the world, over a country that has been sponsoring terrorism for decades, with death to Americans, death to America. And we are having a conversation about some sort of intelligence that's not even 100% baked about if this is 2 weeks, 2 months, or 5 years of how pushed back that they are in regards to making a nuclear weapon. We're not taking the success of what we should have, and it is the fact that after years and decades of us trying to negotiate with this regime, it has never worked. The president did say he was going to do this, and he did it. And now he's trying to broker a peace deal. And that's what we should be concentrating on more than anything. And thanking our military.
Well, but the military was also involved in this assessment, Ashley. It was Central Command and their damage report that the Pentagon's intelligence operation is relying on this early assessment. Is it also just as bad to push back on our intelligence gathering apparatus and those who are actually trying to make sure that they get an accurate assessment of what they were really able to accomplish?
So what happens normally is the 17 different parts of the intelligence world come together, and our allies, such as Israel, will come together to make one report. And so all these 17 different areas of intelligence do their own part. Yes, this is one part of the DoD, 100%, and I agree with that. So whatever they came out with, they don't have the full picture of all the other intelligence that we use. So it's just, but listen, I get it. I mean, this has become a political thing more than anything. And so it's what especially the Democrats are kind of pushing on.
What do you think of this conversation, Jeannie? I know we've been in it for a couple of days now, and you've been part of it here every day on Balance of Power. The president suggests that questioning the veracity of the intelligence or the result of the strike is a disrespect to the pilots who put their lives in danger to conduct this mission. Is he right?
No, he's absolutely wrong. And listen, I don't want Ashley's blood to boil any more than it is. So sorry to say that.
It's okay, Jeannie. I love you.
Thank you. The reality, though, is that the administration had an objective, and that was to denuclearize Iran for as long as possible. And we understand the reports that have come out are preliminary. Obviously, Ashley's absolutely right about that. We need to wait and see what those assessments are. But even in the best case scenario, if their nuclear infrastructure was obliterated, there isn't an international intelligence operative out there or any scholar who has looked at this who hasn't said Iran cannot rebuild this. And so the reality is the objective to denuclearize, is it best to do it via bombing like we did, or was it best to try to negotiate so we could get people on the ground to see how they're doing? The president chose the former. He chose to bomb, and now he is terribly frustrated by the reality that Iran will rebuild. It doesn't matter if they go to the negotiating table or not. In fact, he has given every country out there who's looking at Libya, looking at Ukraine, looking now at Iran, what are they all saying? My gosh, I better rush and do what North Korea did and get myself a bomb however I can, because that is the only way I'm going to defend myself. And so this has worked at counter purposes. The president doesn't want to acknowledge that. He doesn't like to be challenged. But the reality is, whether they obliterated it or not, Iran retains the ability to rebuild. And no matter who is in power, regime change or not, they will do that. Why did he blow up the nuclear deal from 2018 and now try to reestablish it? He's got a lot of answer to. He doesn't want to do that.
We had some headlines crossing a few minutes ago, Ashley, from Axios, which is reporting that the president is going to start limiting sharing classified information with Congress as a result of the leak of this preliminary assessment that we were just discussing. Axios citing sources familiar with the matter in that reporting, knowing that there were members of Congress, specifically in the Gang of Eight, who typically would have been read into a strike like this before it happened, that were not, in fact. Do you view that as an appropriate response? Should we really be cutting off the information sharing with one of the co-equal branches of government?
mean, I think I didn't see the Axios article yet, but I do think that that could be a slippery slope. But I also do understand the fact that and this happened under President Biden as well, and President Obama and President Bush. There is a concern with the leaking that happens in our country, and obviously it puts people's remember what happened with the Scooter Libby days under George Bush. I mean, that puts people's lives in danger if things are leaked. So I don't know how much they're going to curtail people's ability for classified information, but I would think that that is something that Congress will push back on.
It is kind of ironic, Jeannie, that a lot of this seems to be stemming from the Signal chat scandal that involved the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. When we've had Republican lawmakers on the air to talk about this, they've really highlighted, and the administration has as well, the fact that this mission over Iran did not leak, that the secrecy in itself was part of the success. And they've credited that for not notifying Democrats on Capitol Hill. Where are we going with this?
The reality is the War Powers Act, or resolution rather, of 1973 requires that the president notify Congress within 48 hours. That is the law. He needs to provide a classified briefing. I hope we haven't reached a point in this country where we can't allow the president to do that because we're worried about leaking. If we are, they are absolutely right to investigate these leaks. But in addition to that, I hope we have protections in place for those analysts who used their skills to come up with this analysis, that they are not pushed out of their jobs as a result of coming up with facts that don't align with what this White House wants to hear from a PR perspective. So yes, look into the leakers. You need to go to Congress. You need to tell them what is going on. That is the law. But also let's protect these analysts who are there doing their job. And there is a lot of scuttle around that those analysts are under fire right now.
Jeannie, we just have a minute left here, but of course, while the Middle East featured heavily at the NATO summit, it also brought what arguably was a big win for President Trump, and all NATO countries except Spain agreeing to increase their defense spending to 5% of GDP, or at least target that, something he has long been advocating for. What does that say about his ability to influence allies like that?
It is a win for him. It's also a win for the Secretary General. And, you know, Kaylee, I didn't get to talk to you about this off the air, but the "Who's Your Daddy" comment was a great comment by the Secretary General. The flattery got him everywhere, and they did get to this point. So it is a big win for the president. Noteworthy, no condemnation of Russia for Ukraine this time around. And the president acknowledging that Putin may go farther was also, I think, a big moment from the summit.
Yeah, the daddy comment did work its way into the press conference. I believe a reporter asked the president if he views NATO allies as being like his children. We'll have to get into that another time. Jeannie Shanzano and Ashley Davis, our political panel today. Thank you both so much for joining us. And still ahead here on Balance of Power, Joe, we have to talk about what happened in New York City last night.
Unreal.
An upset.
I should say
in
so.
the mayoral primary.
You see this headline that just crossed the terminal? Kind of fascinating. Wall Street preparing for hot commie summer after the blowout in the Democratic primary last night. We'll talk to Don Levy about it coming up next on Bloomberg.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris. Purchases of new homes in the U.S. fell in May to a 7-month low. Rampant builder price cuts and sales incentives just fell short of alleviating any affordability constraints. Sales of new single-family homes decreased 13.7%. That's below all estimates in a Bloomberg survey. Home builders are struggling to maintain their order books amid mounting economic challenges, including mortgage rates that are stuck near 7%, higher materials costs because of tariffs, and a slowing labor market. Wall Street's rebound from April's meltdown is showing signs of exhaustion. We check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 now down 11 points. NASDAQ is up only 6 points, and the Dow is down 213 points. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.31%, the 2-year yield at 3.79%. Bumble plans to reduce its global workforce by about 240 roles. That represents about 30% of that company. Bumble also boosted its adjusted EBITDA guidance for the second quarter. The guidance beat the average analyst estimate. Shares of Bumble now 21% higher. Shell denies that Wall Street Journal report that it is in active talks about acquiring its London-based oil rival BP. Shell spokesperson tells Bloomberg, quote, "This is further market speculation. No talks are taking place. U.S. shares of Shell are 0.5% lower. U.S. shares of BP now less than 2% higher." For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's go back to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
Many thanks, Amy Morris, watching Wall Street for us here as we talk politics in Washington and in New York. We're going to get to the mayoral primary, a blowout last evening and a remarkable result that we're going to explore with Don Levy coming up in just a moment. We do have some headlines on the terminal as we rejoin with Kaylee Lyons here in Washington. Not a huge shocker, Kaylee. The enhanced supplementary leverage ratio is what we're talking about. Don't worry, there will not be a pop quiz. The Federal Reserve planning to roll it back. The SLR, which applies to the big U.S. banks, Kaylee, we're talking about capital requirements and a reduction in that level.
Yeah, this isn't all too surprising. Actually, the Fed chair was in his second day of testimony on Capitol Hill today before the Senate Banking Committee and did tell the committee that they were going to put out something on SLR for comment today, knowing that what they have proposed here, which is reducing the capital requirement for the largest U.S. banks from 5% to 3.5% to 4.5% range and from 6% to 3.5% and 4% for their banking subsidiaries, is now going to be open to comment. And I would imagine there's going to be a lot of input from relevant parties over this 60-day comment period. So it very well could change, but still this is a step the Fed is looking to take to effectively, as we heard Chairman Powell characterize today, do something that would free up more capital for banks.
That's right. Did he have less fun or more fun on the Senate side after the House
I'm not sure he
yesterday?
ever has fun in any
Neither
of
of
these
them looked
hearings.
enjoyable, I have to admit. Yeah, it has concluded, by the way, if you were watching that a little earlier on Bloomberg TV. I don't think Andrew Cuomo is having fun either this morning, although it's unclear exactly what his political fortunes are. What we can tell you is, despite the conversations you heard on this program yesterday, that it was Andrew Cuomo's race to lose. Well, I guess that was true in part because he lost the race in a remarkable blowout in the Democratic primary in New York. Here he was from last night.
Tonight was not our night. Tonight was Assemblyman Mondani's night, and he put together a great campaign. I called him. I congratulated him. I applaud him sincerely for his effort, and let's give him a round of applause.
Yes, indeed. His rival, Cuomo's that is, Zohran Mamdani, won the primary, at least unofficially, knowing that New York does use a ranked choice voting system. It will be about a week before the final result is actually tallied. But in the first round of ranked voting, it was Mamdani that garnered 43.5% of the vote to Cuomo's just 36.4%. Mamdani, of course, identifying as a democratic socialist, has some pretty strong ideas of how to improve affordability in New York City. So for more on his prospects in the general and how we should be viewing this from New York City is Laura Namias, who is our New York City and state reporter here at Bloomberg. So Laura, obviously Mamdani was relatively unknown until semi-recently, used social media to propagate these ideas like freezing rent, free childcare, city-owned grocery stores. How should we think about the way in which he's going to be pitching those ideas as he moves forward as, at this point, the presumptive Democratic nominee for mayor?
Well, At this point, I think he is thinking about how he can pitch himself for the general election, because unlike in previous election cycles in New York, where the Democratic primary winner is the presumptive winner overall because of the overwhelming Democratic voter enrollment advantage, in New York City, Mamdani is likely going to have to face a competitive general election in November. So he still needs to win another very big contest. And that may mean reaching out and trying to appeal to some of the people who didn't vote for him and who, frankly, might be feeling a little afraid of what he represents and what he might be able to do as mayor. So he hasn't said anything yet about that, but we'll be looking to see what he does say.
33 years old, as Kaylee mentioned, self-identified Democratic Socialist from Queens. Let's hear from Mamdani from last night. Listen.
Tonight, we made history. An hour ago, I spoke with Andrew Cuomo about the need to bring this city together. We have won because New Yorkers have stood up for a city they can afford.
Echoing the words of Nelson Mandela, it always seems impossible until it's done. Laura, what does a platform of free buses, city-run grocery stores, free child care, rent freezes, and wealth taxes mean in a general election?
Well, I think the important thing to note, and as we have written, is that some of what he's proposing would be paid for by things that he can't do unilaterally. The mayor of New York City has very little power to affect tax increases unilaterally, basically none, actually. So he's proposing to pay for things like free buses and for universal child care through two mechanisms, an increase in the income tax, a 2% increase in the income tax on people earning over $1 million, and an increase in the corporate tax rate at the state level. Both of those things would have to be enacted by Albany and signed by Governor Kathy Hochul. She has already signaled that she won't sign that. And there's been some resistance to increasing taxes in Albany amid fears of exodus of the base of taxpayers who help pay for a significant amount of the services that people enjoy in New York. So it's a question of what he can actually affect. Some things are a little bit easier for him to do. He does have power over the Rent Guidelines Board, which controls rent increases in rent-stabilized and rent-controlled apartments, but not market-rate apartments. He can't freeze the rent for everyone, of course. And city-owned grocery stores is potentially logistically difficult, but and could face some significant opposition from labor unions, but is not totally impossible.
She's so good at this. Laura Namias, we thank you so much, Laura, for all your insights in all of our shows this week. Bloomberg New York City and state reporter on this day after the primary. We wanted to spend some time with Don Levy, not only because he understands the contours of the electorate in New York, but he's the preeminent pollster in America and understands the challenges of ranked choice voting. How are we so far off in understanding where this was going? Siena College Research Institute Director, who we got to know real well in the 24 campaign, Don Levy, back with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Don, it's great to see you. Is ranked choice the nightmare of a pollster?
Well, certainly between ranked choice and a primary, that's a tough one for pollsters. The consensus of the polls as we approached primary day was that Andrew Cuomo would carry the election day. And if you added up all the various polls coming in, it looked like a 6, 7, 8 point perhaps win for Cuomo on election day that was going to tighten as we saw ranked choices. Quite a few of the lesser supported candidates, including, say, Brad Lander, had cross-endorsed Mamdani, and it looked as though it was going to get very, very tight when we moved on to the 6th, 7th round of ranked choice. But that's not what happened. Mamdani had incredible momentum that was starting to show itself in some of the polling. In fact, one poll had it as close as Cuomo only up by 2 points on election day, but it ended up flipping. And Mamdani carried that incredible momentum and an enormous turnout amongst young voters who have previously never voted in a New York City mayoral primary. So the momentum certainly was with Mamdani, and Cuomo's numbers really never moved. He was, consensus had him at about 38 points amongst election day voters. He ended up at about 36. he never widened his base at all. And Mamdani ended up picking up support from the lesser candidates and on his own. So really a shocking victory for a candidate that 2 months ago, when we last polled it, was little known to many New Yorkers.
Well, as you refer to the lesser candidates that Mamdani was able to pick up, the cross endorsement of Brand-Lander was really something. He, of course, got third in the first round of ranked choice voting, but he also had some choice words, shall we say, for Andrew Cuomo in the aftermath. This is him last night.
Andrew Cuomo is in the past. He is not the present or future of New York City. Good riddance.
Wow.
Second day in a row, we've had to bleep the words of a politician on this program. Don, it was the president of the United States yesterday. But to the idea of this being good riddance for Andrew Cuomo, it's not necessarily. He's floated the idea of running in the general as an independent. Would the results from yesterday, though, suggest that he stands any real shot if he tries again?
Well, I can never attempt to climb into the mind of the former governor of the state of New York. It's 4 years ago that he left office in a level of disgrace. This was an attempt at his comeback. He's going to have to make a decision. And right now, it appears with the current mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, on the ballot, that Cuomo and Adams might be competing for the same voters. These would be voters who do not feel as though Mamdani has the requisite experience, that he's too far left of some New Yorkers. There, of course, have been accusations of anti-Semitism against Mamdani. So there's a lane available for another candidate. It seems highly unlikely that there's a lane available for two candidates, both Cuomo and Adams. It'll be really interesting to see if indeed one of them decides to bow out. At this point, it really does look as though Adams is in. Cuomo's going to have to make a decision.
Really interesting, Don. So the idea of a four-way general seems less likely as we talk to you more. You're, of course, on Bloomberg, and we're talking in part to the investment community here. Up with a story on our terminal today. Wall Street decries hot commie summer after Mamdani surprise. What is the conversation on Wall Street? What are they saying at lunch today on the Upper East Side as well?
Well, certainly they're shocked. And I think in your lead-in, you certainly showed that Mamdani does not have the power to do some of the things that he's talking about in terms of raising taxes, in terms of finding a way to perhaps frighten some of our Wall Street friends to pay for the ideas that he is campaigning on in New York. So there might be some New Yorkers on Wall Street who are discounting Mamdani and saying that he'll learn. It's one thing to, as Cuomo called him, be a messenger. It's something else entirely to be the mayor of New York City. So it's going to be a wild ride here over the near future in New York City, unanticipated. And I think you also raised this idea that there's going to have to be a complicated relationship between the governor of the state of New York, Kathy Hochul, and the mayor of New York City, if indeed it ends up being Mamdani, that right now they don't seem to be operating on the same policy playbook.
Well, to say nothing of the potential relationship or adversarial relationship we might see outright between a Mayor Mamdani and a President Trump, if that's what we end up with, Don. So in our final moment with you, how should we be thinking about what just happened in New York City and what it might signal for the Democratic Party as a whole on a national scale?
Well, we're certainly seeing a battle. We saw the White House already come out with statements denigrating Mamdani, saying that this is somehow indicative of the immigration crisis that they're trying to address nationally. We've already seen Elise Stefanik, who's campaigning against Kathy Hochul, putting out a fundraiser attacking Mamdani and saying that this shows that the Democrats have completely lost their way and are out of touch with America. So all these currents are going to be taking place. I think it's too early to tell what it says about the general Democratic Party writ large, except to the point that there are in crisis. There's a turmoil within the Democratic Party that the old guard is being pushed aside to some degree. but the extreme left wing doesn't appear likely to be able to capture the national attention. New York is one thing, a primary in New York is one thing, the United States is something different.
All right, Don Levy of Siena College, thank you so much for joining us. And we should note Michael Bloomberg did endorse Andrew Cuomo in that primary. He is the founder and majority owner of the parent company of this network. We'll see you again later on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is Bloomberg Business Week Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week Daily with Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
All right, everybody, a very good afternoon. Yes, indeed, on TV, radio, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals, Bloomberg Business Week Daily. Carol Master, Tim Stenivek, live here at Bloomberg headquarters in New York City. It was looking a little bit more risk on earlier in the session, although there were little moves earlier in the day. Right now, we've got some small moves for the most part to the downside.
Yeah, some of the breath being taken out of this rally, but NVIDIA is still hitting its first intraday high going all the way back to January. So notch one for big tech there. S&P 500 still hovering around all-time highs, Carol. It's kind of like the April 2nd Liberation Day, or so-called Liberation Day. That never happened.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. All right, a lot going on, though. We are going to get in, of course, into the markets in just a moment, but we are going to talk a little bit more about Jay Powell, day two, anything new. Yep, a rhyme. Poet, didn't know it. There you have it. We'll see what Michael McKee has to say. Hey, plus we're going to get into the reality of Iran's nuclear capabilities and that pile of uranium. It's all about that. What do we really know about the impact on Iran's capabilities? We're going to get into that in just a moment.
Also, a possible tie-up between two energy giants, and Wall Street decries what's being called, quote, hot commie summer after the surprise Democratic primary outcome for the New York City mayoral election.
We're also going to get to a most read story on the Bloomberg that involves AK-47s. You know you're going to want to hear about that one. All right, right now, let's get a check on the trading day. We are off our best levels of the session. For the latest, here's Amy Morrison for Charlie Pellet.
All right, thank you, Carol. The Federal Reserve plans to roll back the enhanced supplementary leverage ratio. That applies to the largest U.S. banks to reduce their capital requirement from 5% to 3.5% to 4.5%, and from 6% to 3.5% to 4.5% for their banking subsidiaries. We do check markets for you all day long at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 is now down 7 points. NASDAQ is up 17 points. The Dow is down 185 points. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.31%, the 2-year yield at 3.79%. NVIDIA shares rose to an all-time high, extending in advance, cementing its position as one of the most valuable companies in the world. This is only the latest milestone for NVIDIA. It has risen 63 off an April low, a rally that added more than $1.4 trillion to its market capitalization. Shares of NVIDIA now 3.8% higher. BlackBerry shares 15% higher after the software company boosted its revenue forecast for the full year. Analysts were positive about the company's forecast and hiked their price target on the stock. Reddit shares up nearly 2%, up more than 60% off an April low. RBC Capital Markets wrote it wouldn't be surprised to see momentum for Reddit turn into a strong earnings report. Investors have been sounding more positive on Reddit. Bumble plans to reduce its global workforce by 240. That represents about 30% of the company. Bumble also boosted its adjusted EBITDA guidance for the second quarter, which beat the average analyst estimate. Shares of Bumble now 21% higher. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's go back to Bloomberg Business Week Daily with Carol Masser and Tim Stenovec.
All right, much appreciated, Amy Morris there. Hey, it is day two that we did see Fed Chair Jay Powell up on Capitol Hill answering questions from members of Congress, the Senate Banking Committee. The Fed chair said that the U.S. Central Bank is still struggling to determine the impact of tariffs on consumer prices. He also talked about a strong economy, repeated his message that officials need not rush to lower interest rates. So let's get to it. And I also want to get into this headline that just crossed about 20 minutes ago. Federal Reserve releasing plans to ease those key bank capital rule. So with us is Bloomberg News international economics and policy correspondent Michael McKee, live in our Washington, D.C. bureau. Mike, I guess we should do the headline first. This was widely expected, correct?
Widely expected. The Fed advertised that it was going to be holding this meeting, and they've been talking about changing the supplementary leverage ratio for some time. Bloomberg News reported the details of their new proposal last week, and today they adopted it. Basically, under the old regime that was put in place by the former vice chair of supervision for the pandemic and during the great financial crisis.
Guarantee that the banks are going to use that capital to buy treasuries, right?
Criticisms of changing the rule. The banks could just do other things. But the bank, in terms of buying bonds, they can't warehouse them and turn around and sell them later, and it affects their ability.
Federal Reserve. We spoke yesterday after he had been in front of members of the House of Representatives. I asked you if we'd hear anything different in front of members of the Senate Banking Committee. Now that time has passed, and I'll have you follow up on that. Did we hear anything different in today's testimony, in today's Q&A, than we heard yesterday?
Not on interest rates or unemployment or inflation. Those were pretty much the same answers from Jay Powell that he gave yesterday. Inflation's likely to go up at some point because of tariffs. Unemployment might rise because of tariffs.
Wait and see what the impact is before it decides on interest rates. Same that we had. But
His term expires next year. He made these comments earlier today. That press conference at The Hague, where that he